Today, I bring to you a collection of scary Reddit stories that I've read that started out completely normal. And they don't end completely normal. They end actually quite the opposite of that, but I'm not going to spoil. Imagine I just told you all the endings right now. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoy these stories as much as I did. Let's go ahead and get right into it. The first story today is from r/no-sleep from user MoLogic. I found out why a pirate crew vanished in 1699, and I wish I hadn't. Jack Falls isn't the kind of town that gets written about in travel magazines. Population hovering around 3,000, one main street with a hardware store, and a diner that closes at 6, and a coastline so rocky and unwelcoming that even the seagulls seem pissed off about it. The town's claim to fame is its name, which comes from Captain Jack Morgan, a pirate who supposedly fled British naval ships in 1699 and vanished somewhere along our stretch of coast. Local legend says he and his crew made it to shore with their plunder, but were never seen again. Most people assume they got away in a rowboat or died in the surf. I assumed that too, until 3 months ago. Mark had been obsessed with the Captain Jack story since we were kids. He'd grown up on tales his grandfather told him about hidden treasure and secret caves. The kind of thing that sounds awesome when you're 10 and pathetic when you're 27. But Mark never let it go. He spent years researching old naval records, studying tide patterns, hiking every inch of coastline looking for cave entrances that matched historical descriptions. His girlfriend Sarah enabled him, mostly because she found his enthusiasm charming and because she liked hiking. Me, I just went along because Mark was my best friend and I didn't have much else going on. When Mark called me that October morning, I could hear the tremor in his voice before he even said hello. I found it, John. I actually fucking found it. He'd been exploring a section of cliff face about 2 miles north of town. Somewhere where we'd passed dozens of times without noticing anything unusual. But the recent storm had caused a minor rock slide, and Mark had spotted something that made him scramble down to investigate. A small opening, partially concealed by centuries of erosion and debris, but unmistakably man-made around the edges. He'd taken photos, measurements, and coordinates. He wanted to go back with proper equipment. "It's this weekend or never," he said. "Tide patterns won't be this favorable again until next year, and you know the county's been talking about putting up fencing along the whole stretch. This is it, John. This is actually it." I should have said no. I had a dozen good reasons. My knees weren't what they used to be. I had work on Monday. Cave diving, or spelunking, or whatever the hell you wanted to call crawling around in tight, dark spaces, had never been my idea of fun. But Mark had that tone in his voice, the one that meant he was going with or without me. Unfortunately, I'd known him since we were 10, and I couldn't let my best friend do something that stupid alone. Sarah picked me up Saturday morning in Mark's truck, the bed already loaded with gear. Helmets with mounted lights, ropes, carabiners, a first aid kit that looked military grade, energy bars, water bottles, and what looked like a small sledgehammer. "In case we need to widen anything," Sarah explained when she caught me staring. She was tall and athletic. From what Mark told me, she ran marathons for fun and had opinions about specific hydration packs. She worked as a physical therapist and approached Mark's treasure hunting with the same practical enthusiasm she brought to helping people recover from knee surgery. Mark's already down there doing a preliminary scout. He's been up since 4. The drive took 20 minutes. The last 5 on a dirt road that barely qualified as a path. We parked where the trees gave way to scrub grass and jagged rocks, the ocean visible as a gray-blue line in the distance. The wind coming off the water was cold enough to sting. Mark was waiting by the cliff edge, practically vibrating with excitement. He'd rigged a rope system to make the descent easier, and he walked us through it twice before we started down. The climb down wasn't terrible. Maybe 30 feet of careful scrambling, but it was enough to get my heart rate up. The cave entrance was exactly as unimpressive as I had feared. A crack in the rock face, maybe 3 feet high and 2 feet wide. Mark had cleared away some of the smaller debris, but it still looked like the Earth's asshole. "You're sure about this?" I asked. "The historical records are clear," Mark said, pulling out his phone to show me a photo of the yellowed document. British naval logs from the HMS Dartmouth, dated November 1699. They chased Morgan's crew to this exact stretch of coast. The pirates made it to shore, but never came back out. The naval captain assumed they had a ship waiting on the other side of the peninsula, but there's no record of Morgan or his crew ever surfacing again. 18 men, John. 18 men and a cargo hold worth of Spanish silver just vanished. Maybe they drowned, I said. Then where are the bodies? Mark's eyes had that gleam I recognized, the one that meant he'd already made up his mind and was just going through the motions of conversation. This cave goes somewhere. I can feel the air moving. There's space in there. Sarah was already putting on her helmet, checking her light. We stick together, we stay in radio contact, and if anything feels wrong, we turn back. Deal? I wanted to say no. I wanted to suggest we call someone official, get proper permits, and do this the right way. But I could see the desperation in Mark's face, the way his hands kept clenching and unclenching. This was his white whale. His one shot at proving all those years of research weren't wasted. Sarah was already checking her gear. The opening was right there, and I was already putting on my helmet. We went in single file. Mark first with the biggest light, then Sarah, then me bringing up the rear. Now, I'm not a big guy, but the entrance was still a tight squeeze. I had to turn my shoulders and exhale to fit through. Rocks scraped against my back and chest simultaneously. For about 10 feet, it felt like I was being swallowed. The walls were pressed in from all sides, and then suddenly it opened up. The first chamber was about the size of a large bedroom. The ceiling high enough to stand in most places. Our lights cut through the darkness, revealing rough stone walls and a floor that sloped gently downward. The air was cool, but not cold, with a faint smell I couldn't quite place. Mineral, maybe? Salt? Yet there was something organic underneath it all. See? Mark's voice echoed slightly. This is definitely man-made. Look at the walls. He was right. In places you could see tool marks, spots where someone had deliberately widened the passage or smoothed away irregularities. It wasn't obvious, not unless you were looking for it, but once Mark pointed it out, I couldn't unsee it. We moved deeper. The cave branched twice, but Mark seemed confident about which way to go, consulting a hand-drawn map he'd made based on his research. He'd overlaid British naval charts with geological surveys and local folklore, creating a composite that supposedly showed the most likely route the pirates would have taken. I didn't understand half of it, but Sarah seemed convinced enough to keep following. The temperature stayed consistent, that cool but not cold feeling, and the faint smell grew stronger. Not quite mineral anymore. Something else. Copper pennies, maybe? Old metal? I caught myself breathing through my mouth to avoid it, which was stupid, because then I could taste it instead. About 40 minutes in, we stopped to drink water and check our bearings. Mark's excitement was palpable, but I noticed Sarah was quieter than usual. When I asked if she was okay, she just nodded and said the smell was getting to her too. We agreed to give it another hour before turning back, regardless of what we found. The passage narrowed and widened in irregular patterns, sometimes forcing us to crouch, other times opening into spaces where our lights couldn't quite reach the ceiling. In one larger chamber, we found the remains of old torches, just charred bits of wood that crumbled when Mark tried to pick one up. Evidence someone had been here before, which made sense given the pirate story, but also made the place feel more oppressive somehow. It was as if we were following in the footsteps of doomed men. There, Sarah said suddenly, pointing her light at the wall. Scratched into the stone, barely visible, were marks. Not random scratches, but deliberate cuts. Symbols that might have been letters worn smooth by time. Mark ran his fingers over them, his breath coming faster. He pulled out his phone and took several photos from different angles. "This is it," he whispered. "This is actually it. This is 17th century script. I'm sure of it. Look at the way the R's are formed, and the long S that looks like an F. This is period accurate." He was nearly trembling as he traced the letters, his academic background in colonial history finally paying off in the most literal way possible. The passage narrowed again, forcing us to crouch and then crawl. My knees immediately regretted every decision that had led me here. The walls felt closer now, and I became acutely aware of the tons of rock above us. The ocean somewhere beyond that, the very real possibility of getting stuck or lost or worse. After maybe 20 minutes of crawling, my hands were scraped raw even through my gloves, and my knees felt like they'd been beaten with a hammer. The passage opened into another chamber, this one larger than the first, maybe 15 feet across and 10 feet high. Our lights played across the walls, revealing more tool marks and what looked like old scorch marks from torches. Then, Mark swept his light around and froze. Holy shit. The skeleton was slumped against the far wall, still wearing the rotted remains of what might have been a coat. The fabric had long since degraded to brown tatters, but you could still make out what might have been brass buttons scattered on the ground nearby. The skull had tipped forward, jaw hanging open in a silent scream, and one arm was extended as if reaching for something. Around the bones were scraps of leather, a rusted knife that had corroded almost completely away, and what looked like the remains of a small barrel. The wooden staves collapsed inward. Sarah yelped like she'd been punched. Mark just stood there, staring, his light steady on the corpse. Is this real?" Sarah asked. "It's real." Mark's voice was barely above a whisper. He moved closer, careful to not disturb anything, playing his light over the remains. "Look at the clothing, the style of the coat, the buttons. This is late 17th century. I'd bet my life on it. This is one of them, one of Morgan's crew." But what made us all stop and really stare was the wall behind the skeleton. Someone had carved words into the stone. Not just a few marks, but entire paragraphs. The letters crude but deliberate, clearly done with something small and sharp, probably that knife, over what must have been days or weeks. The text started high up on the wall and descended in ragged columns, getting harder to read as it went down. Mark moved closer, playing his light over the text, and began to read aloud. His voice shook slightly. November 15th, 1699. We are 12 now. The cave goes deeper than we thought. Captain says there's a way through to the other side of the peninsula, but Davies and Mockton went looking 2 days past and haven't returned. We hear them sometimes, calling from below, but we search and find nothing. The handwriting was rough, the spelling inconsistent, in the way of men who'd learned their letters late in life, but the message was clear. Mark moved his light down, finding more text carved in shaking lines. November 18th. The food is running low. Captain has ordered rationing. We do not dare go back the way we came. The Navy dogs are surely waiting at the entrance. James swears he heard Davies calling from somewhere below, but we search and find nothing. The air tastes wrong down here. Thomas says it's the damp, but I know better. Something's not right. "Jesus," Sarah breathed. She moved closer to me, and I realized she was shaking. More text. The letters growing more cramped and erratic as they descended the wall, like the writer had been running out of space, or time, or sanity. November 22nd. 5 more are gone. They went deeper, seeking another way out, seeking fresh air, seeking anything but this tomb. The captain is changing. He speaks of voices in the dark. William says the treasure is cursed and we should leave it, abandon it in the deepest hole we can find, but the captain will not hear of it. He guards it like a dragon guards gold in the old stories my mother used to tell me. The walls feel warm to the touch now, which makes no sense this deep. We are far below the sun's reach. The water that drips from above is thick and sticky, not clean like it should be. It leaves stains on our clothes. Jacob drank some yesterday despite warnings and has been sick ever since. He can't stop shitting himself. The smell is awful. I reached out and touched the wall where the writer had mentioned warmth. The corpse was right. It was warm. Not hot, but distinctly warmer than it should be this far underground. At least 10 degrees warmer than the air around it. I pulled my hand back and found my fingertips slightly damp with that same sticky residue. "Keep reading," I said. Mark continued, his light moving to text that was barely legible now. The letters scratched so hard and fast they'd gouged the stone in places, leaving deep furrows that our lights cast shadows in. November 27th. 3 of us remain. Jacob died yesterday. We buried him in the tunnel, but this morning he was gone, as if the cave swallowed him whole. The captain has taken the treasure and Thomas deeper into the cave. He says the voices told him where to go. He's mad, but we are all mad. The cave breathes, I swear it. At night I hear it, a great bellowing sound like a whale. The walls pulse. Yesterday I saw John Carver embedded in the rock up to his waist, still alive but unable to move, his eyes following me as I passed. He was begging me for help, but I didn't know what to do. I tried to dig him out, but the rock was soft like clay, and it only made him sink deeper. When I returned hours later, he was gone, only a stain remaining like someone had spilled wine. The thing in the caves, it hungers, it feeds slowly, it savors. Okay, I said. Okay, we should go back. Are you kidding? Mark's eyes were wild in the light of his headlamp. This is it, John. This is the actual historical record of what happened to them. And the treasure. He says the captain took it deeper. It's still down here. Mark, this is clearly a man losing his mind, Sarah said, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Walls that breathe, people embedded in rock. He was starving and dehydrated. Then explain this. Mark pointed to a spot on the wall where the text ended. There, carved with what must have been the last of the writer's strength, were final words. It took them all. It will not let us leave. Below that, a date. December 3rd, 1699. And below that, scratched so deep the stone had cracked, it beats. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of our breathing and a faint dripping somewhere in the darkness beyond our lights. There's another passage, Mark said, pointing to a gap in the far wall. If the captain went deeper, that's where he'd have gone. The treasure is down there. Mark, no, I said. This is insane. We should document this, come back with professionals. But by the time we do that, the county will have sealed the cave. You know they will. This is our one chance. He was already moving toward the gap, Sarah following only after a moment's hesitation. I looked at the skeleton one more time, at those empty eye sockets and that reaching hand, and then I followed my friends deeper into the earth. The passage was tighter than anything we'd encountered so far, a squeeze that required moving our packs and pushing them ahead of us while we crawled on our bellies. The rock pressed in from all sides, and for one horrible moment I was certain I'd gotten stuck. My chest too large for the gap, my hips wedged between unyielding stone. Then something gave way, and I popped through into a larger space where Mark and Sarah were waiting. You okay? Sarah asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. My hands were shaking. This chamber was different from the others. The walls had a strange texture, less like rock and more like something else. Coral, maybe, or cartilage. And the smell was stronger here. That copper penny scent mixed with something organic and faintly rotten. Mark ran his hand along the wall and frowned. This doesn't feel like limestone. What does it feel like? Sarah asked. I don't know. It's softer and warm. Really warm. I touched the wall myself and immediately regretted it. He was right. It was warm. Almost body temperature. And the surface had a slightly yielding quality, like pressing on firm rubber. When I pulled my hand away, my fingertips came back damp with something that wasn't quite water. It was thicker, slightly viscous. When I rubbed my fingers together, it felt alkaline, like the slick you get from dissolving soap. Okay guys, little sidebar. Are these people being digested by the earth? Like, it's what they're describing right now. It kind of sounds like they're inside of a stomach. So, GG's. We should turn back, I said again. Look. Mark's light had found something embedded in the wall. A coin. A gold coin. Its surface tarnished green, but unmistakable. Spanish doubloon. Has to be. Sarah, take a photo. She did. Her camera flashed momentarily, blinding us all. Mark pulled out a small pry bar from his pack and began working at the coin. Mark, don't. The coin came free with a wet sucking sound. Mark held it up triumphantly, turning it in the light. Then Sarah made a sound, and we both looked to where she was pointing. The wall where the coin had been was bleeding. I wish it was stained water or some mineral seepage, but it was blood. Thick, dark blood that welled up from the hole and began to run down the wall in slow rivulets. "What the hell?" Mark whispered. The wall around the wound began to pulse, slowly at first, then faster. A rhythmic motion that spread outward in ripples, and somewhere in the distance, deep in the cave, we heard it. A sound like thunder, like drums, like a heartbeat. "Okay," Sarah said, her voice tight. "Okay, maybe we should—" The wall bled faster, the blood now flowing freely, and more of those pulsing ripples spread outward. In my peripheral vision, I saw a movement. Other areas of the wall beginning to shift and flex. "We need to go," Sarah said. "Now." But Mark was already moving forward, his light catching something in the passage ahead. "Wait, do you see that?" More coins, dozens of them, embedded in the walls and floor like metal studs in leather. And beyond them, a larger space, a chamber. Against every instinct I had, we moved forward. The walls here were unmistakably organic. The texture was wrong. The color was wrong. It had shifted from gray stone to something redder, mottled with darker patches that looked disturbingly like bruises. The floor was wet, covered in a thin film of that same viscous fluid, and our boots made soft squelching sounds with each step. The heartbeat sound was louder now, no longer distant. It echoed from all directions, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. The chamber opened before us, and Mark's light found the treasure. It wasn't the pile of gold I think we all imagined. Instead, the coins and silver pieces were embedded in the walls and floor. Hundreds, maybe, all partially absorbed into the red organic tissue that made up the chamber. Some were still visible as distinct objects, others were half dissolved, their edges blurred and melted into the flesh. And in the center of it all, surrounded by the treasure, were the bodies. They should have been skeletons after 300 years, but they weren't. They were corpses, preserved in various states of decay. Their clothing rotted to rags, but their flesh still clinging to their bones. Some were embedded in the floor, sunken halfway into the tissue as if the cave had slowly been digesting them. Others stood upright, held in place by growths of that red tissue that wrapped around their limbs and torsos like vines. One wore what might have been a captain's coat. His jaw hung open, and in the empty socket of his mouth, something glistened wetly. "This isn't real," Sarah said, but her voice carried no conviction. "This can't be real." The heartbeat was so loud now, it made my ribs vibrate. And as I watched, one of the corpses moved. It was subtle at first, just a twitch of the fingers, a slight turn of the head. Then the jaw began to work, opening and closing slowly. And those empty eye sockets seemed to fix on us. Another corpse moved, then another. The tissue that held them in place began to pulse and contract, pushing them forward, helping them move. They pulled free from the walls with wet tearing sounds, leaving dark cavities behind that immediately began to close. "Run!" I yelled. "Run!" We turned and fled back the way we'd come, but the passage was changing. The walls were contracting, the space narrowing with each pulse of that massive heartbeat. Behind us, I could hear shuffling, scraping sounds as those things pulled themselves from their resting places and began to follow. Mark reached the squeeze point first and threw himself into it, his pack scraping against the walls. Sarah went next, and I could see her struggling, the space tighter than it had been just minutes ago. The walls were warm and wet and moving, contracting slowly like the throat of something swallowing. I glanced back and saw them coming, moving with horrible purpose. Their movements were jerky and wrong, limbs bending in directions they shouldn't. The captain was in front, and as I watched, he opened his mouth, and that wet gleaming thing inside flexed and reached forward. I threw myself into the squeeze and immediately realized I was in trouble. The space was too tight now, the walls pressing in from all sides. I could hear Sarah ahead of me, could see Mark's light on the other side, but I couldn't move forward. The tissue around me pulsed and contracted, and I felt something give way beneath my stomach. The floor softening and beginning to pull me down. "John!" Mark's voice distant and panicked. "John, move!" I pushed with everything I had, my pack catching on something, my helmet scraping rock. Behind me, one of those things reached the squeeze and began to force its way in, its body compressing and bending in ways that made my stomach turn. I could smell it now, that rotting copper smell, and I could feel its breath on the back of my neck. The floor beneath me softened further, and with horror I realized it wasn't just soft, it was dissolving. I could feel the fabric of my pants beginning to stick to it, fibers pulling free, the material weakening. The tissue was digesting me, slowly but surely, breaking me down. With a final desperate heave, I pushed forward, felt something in my chest pop, and then I was through, tumbling. Mark grabbed me and hauled me to my feet. "Go, go, go," Sarah yelled. We ran. The walls pulsed with each heartbeat, narrowing and widening, trying to slow us down. More of those things were appearing, pulling themselves from the walls like hatching insects, their movements growing more coordinated as we watched. The tissue responded to them differently, helping them rather than hindering them, pushing them forward while trying to hold us back. We reached the skeleton in the writing, and I thought we might make it. The entrance was just beyond. Daylight would have just been beyond that. We just had to reach the rope, climb up, get in the truck, and leave this nightmare behind. Mark screamed. I turned in time to see him go down hard. The first skeleton we saw latched onto his ankle with a grip that made him cry out in pain. His helmet flew off, the light spinning across the floor. More of them were pouring through the passage behind us, at least 5 or 6 that I could see, and more beyond them. Mark was on his stomach, kicking frantically with his free leg, trying to break loose. The thing that had him wasn't letting go. Its fingers had sunk into his jeans, and where they gripped, I could see dark stains spreading, the fabric dissolving under its touch. Sarah dove for him without hesitation, grabbing his arms, trying to pull him free. Her face was twisted with effort and terror, tears streaming down her cheeks. I've got you, Mark, just hold on." But the thing was winning, dragging him backward inch by inch toward the others. Mark's fingers scraped against the stone floor, leaving streaks of blood. His eyes found mine, and in them I saw absolute terror. "John, help me." I took a step forward, my hands clenched into fists. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to help them, to grab Mark's other arm, to fight those things off with whatever I had left. Then I saw what was behind Mark. More of them, at least a dozen, shambling forward from the deeper tunnels with those jerky movements, their bodies bent at wrong angles. The captain was among them, that rotted captain's coat still hanging from his shoulders, and his jaw was working slowly like he was trying to speak. Behind them, the passage itself was closing. The walls contracting in visible waves, the organic tissue flexing and pulsing as it moved. The opening was already half the size it had been, and getting smaller with each heartbeat. Sarah looked up at me, still holding on to Mark, and in her eyes I saw the same realization I'd just had. There wasn't time. Even if we got Mark free right now, even if we somehow got past those things, the passage was collapsing and we had seconds, maybe 30 seconds, maybe less, before we were sealed in here forever with these things and this breathing, digesting nightmare. The passage contracted further, 20 seconds maybe. "John, please." Mark's voice was breaking, cracking with fear and pain and desperation. His free leg was kicking at the thing's face, but it didn't even seem to notice. "Please don't leave me. Sarah, don't let him." I saw the passage ahead constricting further, the opening now barely 3 feet wide. 15 seconds. I saw the things closing in, their hands reaching, their mouths working silently. 10 seconds. I saw Sarah straining to hold on to Mark, her boots losing purchase on the floor as it began to soften beneath her weight. The tissue was responding to her, starting to digest her too. In a few more seconds, she'd be stuck, and then she'd be trapped too. and then we'd all die here. 5 seconds. And I ran. Not toward them, away. Toward the entrance passage. Toward daylight. Toward escape. Toward being the only one who survived. "John!" Sarah's scream echoed after me, filled with betrayal and rage and terror and disbelief. "John, you coward! Come back!" I kept running. My boots pounded against stone that was rapidly becoming flesh, each step sinking slightly before I pushed off again. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked back, I would stop, and if I stopped, I would die. Some animal part of my brain had decided that my life was worth more than theirs. "No, no, John, please." "Mark." Sarah's voice was receding now, but I could still hear her sobbing. "Mark, hold on. I won't leave you. I won't." The passage was narrowing fast now, the organic tissue contracting in waves that chased me up toward the surface. Behind me, I could hear Sarah crying, could hear Mark begging, could hear wet sounds of the cave responding to them. The things must have reached them. I heard Sarah scream again, heard Mark cry out, heard sounds I will never be able to forget and can never describe. I kept running. The guilt hit me like a physical blow, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. My legs were moving on their own now. Pure animal panic overriding everything else. Friendship, loyalty, basic human decency. I was going to survive, and they were going to die, and that's just how it was going to be. I reached the next chamber, the one we'd passed through on the way in, and I could hear footsteps behind me. Not the shuffling of those corpse things, but the running footsteps of someone alive. I risked a glance back and saw Sarah. She'd let go of Mark. She made the same choice I had. Her face was streaked with tears and blood, her own blood, from where one of those things had touched her. She was sobbing as we ran, her breathing ragged and desperate. When she saw me looking back, she screamed something I couldn't make out over the sound of my own heartbeat, and the cave's heartbeat, and the wet sliding sounds of those things pursuing us both. We ran together toward the entrance passage, the tunnel that would take us up and out and back to daylight and air that didn't taste like copper and stone that was actually stone. I could see the opening ahead, that blessed crack of gray light, and then I saw what was between us and it. The passage was contracting, but not evenly. About 15 feet ahead, the walls were pulling together and apart in a rhythmic motion, opening and closing like a sphincter valve, like the cave was swallowing. The opening would dilate to maybe 4 feet wide, then contract down to less than 2 feet, then open again. Thump, open, thump, closed. If we timed it right, we could slide through when it opened. If we timed it wrong, we'd be caught when it closed. I put on a burst of speed, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. Sarah was right behind me. I could hear her gasping for air. I could hear her boots on the stone that was now flesh. "On 3, she shouted. "We go on 3. I reached the sphincter first. It was open. The passage wide enough to crawl through, but as I approached, it began to close, the walls contracting with muscular force. I waited, counted the rhythm. Open for about 3 seconds, closed for 2. Open, closed, open. "Now," Sarah yelled. I threw myself forward and slid through on my stomach, the walls brushing my back and chest as they contracted around me. For one horrible second, I thought I was stuck. Thought the passage would close on me and cut me in half. Then I was through, tumbling into the larger space beyond. I turned back to help Sarah. She was halfway through when the passage spasmed. It wasn't the regular contraction I'd been expecting, but a violent convulsion. Like the cave had suddenly clenched every muscle at once. The walls slammed together and caught Sarah's left leg below the knee. She screamed, a sound so full of agony it barely sounded human. "Help me, John, help me." I crawled forward, grabbed her outstretched hands, and pulled. She screamed louder, her fingers digging into my wrist hard enough to leave bruises I'd find later. But I couldn't move her. The passage had her leg, and it wasn't letting go. When I looked down, I saw why. The floor beneath her was softening, turning from flesh-textured stone into actual flesh. Her caught leg was sinking into it, the fabric of her jeans dissolving where it touched the tissue. And the tissue was moving up her leg, climbing higher, beginning to absorb her. I could see it spreading, see her pants disintegrating, see her skin starting to blister and melt where the flesh touched it. "Pull harder," she screamed. "For fuck's sake, John, pull." I pulled. I braced my feet against the wall and pulled with everything I had. Sarah's hands were slipping in my grip, slick with sweat and that viscous fluid that was everywhere now. Behind her, I could hear movement in the tunnel, could hear those things shambling closer. The passage spasmed again, and Sarah shrieked as it crushed her leg further. I heard bone break, saw her knee bend in a direction it shouldn't. It had her up to mid-thigh now, and it was spreading faster. Her shirt was starting to stick to the ground, the fabric pulling apart, threads separating and dissolving. She looked up at me with eyes that were somehow still fighting, still refusing to accept what was happening to her. "Don't you dare leave me. Don't you dare." Behind her, one of those things reached the sphincter. The captain, his rotted face passing through the wall of flesh, pulling it into something that might have been a smile. He reached an arm through the flesh, fingers stretching towards Sarah's back. The passage spasmed again, and this time, when it clenched, I saw Sarah's eyes go wide with a different kind of pain. The tissue was inside her now. I realized. It had absorbed through her skin and was now working on her organs, her blood, everything that made her her. And the captain's hand was 6 inches from her head. I looked at Sarah. I looked at that hand. I looked at the opening beyond that was starting to close, the exit that would trap me in here if I didn't move in the next 5 seconds. Sarah saw it in my face, saw the calculation, saw the decision I was making. "John, no, don't you dare." I let go of her hands. She reached for me, fingers grasping, face twisted with betrayal and desperation. "John!" I backed up, just out of her reach. The captain's hand was almost on her now. Sarah's hand stretched toward me. Fingers splayed, one last desperate attempt to grab me and pull me back into this nightmare with her, to make me share her fate since I'd chosen to abandon her. I kicked her hand away. It wasn't a hard kick. It didn't need to be. Just enough force to knock her arm aside, to give me that extra second I needed to turn and throw myself at the closing gap. Her scream followed me. "You coward! I hope it finds you. I hope it never lets you go." I squeezed through the narrowing space, felt tissue close around me, felt it begin to pull and digest and absorb. For one terrible moment, I was certain I would die there, stuck halfway between chambers while the cave slowly consumed me, and Sarah's screams echoed in my ears. Then my fingers found purchase on harder stone, real stone, and I pulled with strength born of absolute terror. The tissue tore as I ripped free, leaving strips of my clothes and skin behind. And then I was crawling toward light and air and escape. And then I was out, tumbling down the cliff face, the rope Mark had rigged catching me after a short fall. I hung there gasping, my entire body shaking, and I heard it. From inside the cave, muffled by rock but still audible. John, please, it's got Sarah, it's..." Mark's voice, still alive, still conscious, still begging me to come back. I hauled myself up the rope, ignored the screaming, scrambled to the top of the cliff, and ran for Mark's truck. The keys were still in Sarah's pocket, but Mark had hidden a spare under the wheel well like he always did. I started the engine with shaking hands and drove away without looking back. I told the police I'd gone alone, that Mark and Sarah had stayed behind, planning a different hike, that I'd suggested they check the caves, but they'd seem more interested in the coastal trail. I lied to their parents, to their friends, to the search and rescue teams that spent 2 weeks looking for them. I lied to everyone. The cave entrance had sealed itself. When the rescuers finally found it 3 days later, it looked like it had been closed for centuries. Just another crack in the rock face that led nowhere. They went in with equipment and cameras and found only stone. The chambers were gone. The passages collapsed. The organic tissue vanished like it had never existed. But I know the truth. I know what's down there, breathing in the dark, digesting my friends slowly over years or decades or centuries. I know that somewhere in that living rock, Mark and Sarah are still conscious, still aware. Their bodies breaking down cell by cell while the cave savors them like fine wine. And I know I left them there. I moved away from Jack's Falls 3 weeks later after they were declared missing. I couldn't take the looks from their families, couldn't sleep in that apartment knowing they'd help me move in, couldn't walk past the diner where Sarah used to order extra hash browns and Mark would make fun of her for it. I thought distance would help. It didn't. 3 days after I escaped, I found something in my pocket. The gold coin. The one Mark had pried from the wall. The one that had made it bleed. I don't remember picking it up, and I don't remember putting it in my pocket. But there it was, crusted with dried blood that wasn't mine. I threw it in a dumpster 6 blocks from my new apartment. The next morning, it was on my nightstand. I drove it 2 hours into the countryside and hurled it into a lake. I watched it sink into dark water. That night, I woke up with it clutched in my fist. My hand closed so tight around it that the edges had cut into my palm. My sheets were soaked with sweat and that same sticky residue. My pillow smelled like copper. I tried putting it in a safety deposit box. The bank called me the next day saying there had been some kind of mistake with my box number. And when I went to check, the box was empty and the coin was in my car's cup holder. So now I keep it. I carry it with me everywhere because I've learned that fighting it only makes things worse. And every day it gets a little warmer. Every day I can feel it pulse a little stronger. That rhythmic beat that matches what I heard in the cave. Sometimes when I hold it, I can hear them. Not voices exactly, but something like voices. A distant screaming that might be wind in a tunnel or might be something else. And buried underneath that sound, 2 words repeated over and over in Sarah's voice. Come back. Last week, I caught myself looking up driving directions to Jack Falls. I don't remember opening my phone. I don't remember typing anything, but there it was. Route calculated. Estimated arrival time, 3:47 a.m. The coin is getting hotter. Last night, it burned my palm when I held it, leaving a mark that looks disturbingly like a mouth. And when I sleep, I dream of tunnels, of warm, wet walls that pulse with life, of my friends embedded in red tissue, their eyes following me as I walk past. And the worst part, the part that keeps me up at night, staring at the ceiling, unable to escape what I've done. Sometimes when I hold the coin, I can hear the heartbeat. And I know, with absolute certainty, that it's waiting for me to come back. The cave remembers me. It tasted me when I tore free, got a sample of what I am, and now it wants the rest. It's patient. This thing that's been alive since before humans learned to make fire, since before the pirates stumbled into its mouth and became just another meal to be savored over centuries. It can wait. It has time, and eventually, whether from guilt or curiosity or some pull I can't even begin to understand, I know I'll go back. The cave is patient, and it hungers. If you're reading this and you live near Jack's Falls, stay away from the cliffs north of town. Don't go looking for cave entrances or pirate treasure. Don't investigate if you hear sounds coming from the rock face. And if you do go, despite this warning, despite everything I've told you, if you find yourself in tunnels that feel too warm, if you see coins embedded in flesh-like walls, if you hear a heartbeat echoing through the dark, run. Don't look back. Don't try to save anyone. Don't hesitate. Just run. And pray it lets you go. I felt as though this one was a great one to start off with because it really did start out so normal. Like, Mark loves the stories of Captain Jack. His grandfather told him these stories as a kid. Yeah, now we're in a cave that eats people. Anyways, here's the next one. This story is from r/NoSleep from user Satterdead. I must have dinner at exactly 6 p.m. It is really bizarre to look back on the past year and consider that there was a time when my life was simple. I have a different life today, and I would argue I'm a different person. I have to eat every night at specifically 6 p.m. If I don't, there are consequences. That doesn't sound weird at all. People eat at 6 p.m. all the time. Some earlier, some later. I can't do that. It has to be exactly 6 p.m. And if I don't, there are consequences. You wouldn't think there'd be, but there is. And yeah, it is as unusual as it sounds. It started about a year ago. My family was taking me out to celebrate finishing my education as a dental technician. I had technically already worked in the field for some time, mostly internships, but now I had it all on paper. I was officially done, and I could get myself a real job. I had a couple of places lined up. My mom was really excited about it. She booked a table at a pretty pricey downtown restaurant. You need to book it at least 1 or 2 months in advance, especially if you want a weekend or evening slot. Not only did she do that, she booked it with space to spare. Mom, Dad, my girlfriend Amy, my older brother, and my grandparents. One big outing. I was a bit nervous about the meeting Amy. It was their first time, but I figured it'd be fine. We got there around 5:30 on a Friday. I'm not going to out the restaurant. I think they're closed now, but it was this nice downtown place. Slightly elevated with an outdoor terrace. They had 2 bars and these big booths for parties of up to 8. When we got there, they showed us inside, asked us to take off our shoes, and sat us down at the table. You guys ever been to a restaurant where they ask you to take off your shoes? That's new. I've never heard that. First thing they did was go person by person and wash our hands at the table. The appetizer was meant to be eaten with your hands. Dino nuggies are supposed to be eaten with your hands too, but I don't see anybody doing this big preparation. That was the kind of vibe we were walking into. Just for contrast, I'm not into expensive stuff. The whole reason I got into dentistry at all is because I used to be anxious about tongues. I started reading about them just to kind of demystify them. And all of a sudden, it became an interest. Then I went from tongue to teeth. But food-wise, I'm a ramen noodle kind of guy. I'm not really about the whole washing my hands with eucalyptus water thing. We had a couple of drinks, some laughs, some appetizers. They had this shrimp thing they served with dry ice that made the whole table look like a cloud. The chef was apparently a big thing. I think I've seen him on TV a couple times. Let's just call him Chef Mike for reference. It'd be too easy to identify him if I gave you the real first name. We saw him a couple of times that day. A lot of people were running in and out of the kitchen, and if you listen closely, you could hear someone yelling in the other room. As the dot closed in on 6 p.m., a waiter put down a plate right next to me. No one else got a plate like that. It was a kind of zesty halibut with haricots verts and asparagus foam. When I looked up, I realized I'd been served by Chef Mike himself. For the birthday boy, he smiled. It's not my birthday, I smiled back, but thank you. Pardon my assumption, may I ask the occasion? The others at the table chimed in. My grandparents were talking about how inventive I was as a child. My mother straightened her back and started talking about my excellent oral health. Amy was clinging to my arm, a bit overwhelmed about the whole outing. She's not a fan of strangers. Chef Mike just smiled at me. Then you must have a refined palate, he said. Please, it's on the house. A clock chimed in the background. 6 p.m. on the dot. I took a bite. I'm not going to say the halibut was the best thing I've ever had. It wasn't. It was good, though. Buttery, smooth, with just enough texture to stick to your tongue. The foam did a lot of heavy lifting. It was just a couple of bites, but I really enjoyed it. There wasn't really much more to it. We had a lovely dinner and dessert. Then, as we called it a night, Amy and I took an Uber back to our place. That's when I noticed something curious. Someone had sent me money, $80. Now, it's not a lot of money, but there was no name or note attached to it. I figured it was my parents wanting to give me a little extra to go out with Amy, but I wasn't sure. I chalked it up to miscommunication and sent out a, hey, thanks for the $80 in the family group chat, and no one responded. I didn't really think about it. The next day, I was back to slurping up a pack of ramen noodles while doing paperwork. To be a bit extra fancy, I added some fresh bell peppers. I was halfway through an article when I got a notification. $65, no name or note attached. Strange. Not just that I got money again, but that it was a different amount. I sent out another message in the family group chat, thinking maybe my grandparents were the ones who sent it. Maybe they thought the first one didn't go through. I could only speculate, but the group chat stayed silent. Over the next few days, I noticed a couple of things. First of all, there were days when I didn't get any money at all. I did get a couple more deposits though, but only days when I had dinner at exactly 6 p.m. It was the only common denominator. Ramen with bell peppers, I know, twice a week, got me another $65. Fried chicken and rice got me $70. Add some curry sauce and have it again the next day. It got me $73. The sums would differ, but I would only get something on the days where I ate at exactly 6 p.m. The thing is, it was fast and consistent. I could be sitting at home, chilling in front of the TV, and I'd get a notification, but only if I was having dinner at 6 p.m. This brought me to a couple of uncomfortable realizations. First off, the sums would differ depending on what I ate, meaning there was some kind of rating system. And second of all, and maybe more importantly, someone could tell when I was eating. Someone was somehow observing me eat. This triggered all kinds of paranoid responses in me. I would stop eating out of spite. I would bring Amy over and ask her to check outside for someone watching me through the windows. I borrowed a strong magnet from a local magnet fisher to check if I got any bugs on me. All of it turned out nothing. I think the only thing I managed to do was convince Amy that I was getting paranoid. She wasn't too happy about it, but I think that's just because she worries. She's a worrier. One day, I decided to test it all further. I locked myself inside the bathroom, turned off the lights, and hid behind the shower curtain. I had a microwave waffle with some vanilla ice cream in a bowl. I took little bites at exactly 6 p.m. and listened for notification on my phone. My hands were a bit shaky. I was so focused on listening for that sound that every creak and groan of the apartment building sent sparks into my chest. As soon as I finished the bowl, the phone beeped. $45. I couldn't even see my own hands. Unless someone was using infrared or sonar, there was no way they could see or hear what the hell I was doing. Something wasn't adding up. I kept experimenting over the next few days. I tried to test the boundaries of what counted as dinner. Soft foods like drinks and slushies and marmalade didn't count. Neither did snacks like chips or crackers. It had to be something substantial and traditional. I tried going the other way around. I got this really nice cut of beef from a local butcher. I asked Amy to help prepare it, seeing as she's a bit more of a cook than I am. She put some real love into that thing, using a sort of truffle glaze and serving it with roasted potatoes. I asked her to share it with me, but she insisted I had it on my own. She was sort of invested into this experiment too. She'd seen the deposits. I sat down at this little table. I had a heated cloth napkin, a glass of red wine, and ate by candlelight. Once I finished, I checked my phone. $1,200. This wasn't just a creepy experiment anymore. This was real money. Rent money. Amy freaked out when I showed her, dancing around the kitchen like she'd won the lottery. Tomorrow, I'll make homemade ciabatta and chili, she said. If this is what one steak gets us, what'll a 3-course meal do? But where's it coming from, I asked. Why are we getting it? Why don't you just ask? If there's someone watching, then clearly they're listening. She had a point. Amy had some last-minute business to deal with the next day, so I ended up making some hot dogs and mashed potatoes. Nothing fancy, just the powdered stuff right out of the box. But as I sat down, I had an idea. I took a bite and spoke into the empty room. If you can hear me, add 50 cents to the next deposit. I'd never gotten anything less than full dollars, so yeah, that'd catch my attention. I tried watching a show as I ate, but I kept getting this pounding in my chest whenever I thought about being watched. What was the point in watching me eat, and why at 6 p.m.? I finished my meal and put the plate away. As I turned on the dishwasher, my phone chimed. $21.50. Someone was listening. Testing this further just made it stranger. I had some Indian takeout food on the bus, and I still got a deposit. They were still watching me when I was on the move, as long as I had a proper meal. I tried dragging dinner out for 2 hours. I still got a deposit, but much less than usual. I could be eating alone or with friends or at a restaurant. It didn't matter. Someone knew what I was doing, and they were grading it on a scale. I started asking questions. 50 cents for yes, 25 cents for no. I already knew they could hear me, so that was already settled. Can you see me? 50 cents, yes. Do I know you? 25 cents, no. Do you want to hurt me? 25 cents, no. I was so fascinated that it started taking up a lot of time. I would make charts and weigh my options on what to ask. We quickly realized that it didn't work if Amy asked. It had to be me. But when asked if it knew that Amy was there, I got a very clear yes. I started to notice a couple of patterns in the payments. Home-cooked meals regularly got bigger deposits. Also, eating alone. White wine was a big no-no, but red wine was a yes, especially if chilled. I was slowly mapping another person's palate, and I have to admit, it was pretty amazing. A little more salt, another $5. A little less butter, that's another $3. All the while I was asking questions. Whoever was watching me had a hard time answering what or who they were. We had to narrow it down to what they weren't. They were not a regular person. Not a demon or mythical creature, not an alien. I couldn't get a clear enough answer, but I managed to understand they used to be a person. Not a ghost, though. They were clear about that. 25 cents clear. I came up with a system of multiple choice answers. I would write up answer sheets with increments of 10 cents each. That's how I figured out where they came from. First day I asked what continent they lived on. I got 30 cents, correlating with my North America answer. The next day, it pointed me to the United States. Makes sense, that's where I am. The third day, I asked them to write out the first letter of the state code. I got 19 cents, meaning S. The next day, I got 4 cents, meaning D, SD, South Dakota, pretty far away. I tried to narrow down exactly where they were at, but after a while, they stopped answering. Turns out, they didn't know for sure. It was east of the river. That much I figured out. I got the impression that whoever I was communicating with wasn't entirely sure either. Some days, the question I asked took longer to respond to, and there'd be a delay before I got the deposit. All the while, I was raking in some pretty good money. I was averaging $150 a day, just from sticking to this dinner schedule. Amy didn't ask too many questions. We could really use the money if we wanted to get a bigger place. But I had to start asking some uncomfortable questions. I couldn't get over what kind of deal I was actually making. Why would someone go to such lengths just to have me follow a strict schedule? And it was then, almost 2 months after that celebration dinner, that I got a visitor. It was a regular Tuesday. I had started my new job just a couple of weeks prior, so I was more tired than usual when I got home from work. All the tension of getting to know a new workplace just collapsed from my shoulders. Amy was working overtime, but she had prepared a recipe for me to make to ensure we got the most out of our daily mystery deposit. But that's when I got a knock on the door. Now, I get visitors every now and then. My parents, friends, Amy's friends, but this was someone I hadn't seen at my door before. Looking through the peephole, I realized I was looking at none other than our local celebrity chef, Chef Mike. I opened the door, scratching my head. "Hey," he said, dropping the TV persona. "Remember me?" "Yeah, sure," I said. "What are you doing here?" "Have you been getting the payments?" "You know about them?" "Yeah," he nodded. "I get them sometimes too. I just gotta cook the right thing." I invited him in and we got to chatting. Chef Mike told me all about the setup. About once a week, he got a deposit if he served that halibut dish to someone. They didn't have to order it. He would pay for it. It just had to be prepared in a certain way and offered at a certain time and date. As Chef Mike explained it, he wandered around my kitchen, making sure to not touch the counter. It was kind of filthy. Amy doesn't really do dishes, and I'm not much for scrubbing. Chef Mike gave me a long look. "I stopped getting payments after you came by. I think our benefactor has taken a liking to you." "Benefactor? Is that what it is?" "I honestly don't know," he shrugged, "but whatever it is, it kick-started my career. I've made some serious money with this arrangement." "Just from cooking halibut?" "It's not just cooking halibut, it's cooking it to perfection. It's cooking it over a process that has taken me years to calibrate. No one else can do it. It's unique." He pointed a finger at me, and I sat down. Chef Mike had come by to cook me dinner. He wasn't getting payments for halibut anymore, so he figured the benefactor had taken a liking to me. He wanted to try cooking for me to see if it paid off. It almost sounded threatening, like he wasn't asking. He wanted me to agree to him coming by 2 times per week, cooking things he knew would get us a lot of money. I wouldn't have to send him anything. He got deposits of his own. Somehow, our benefactor knew that not only was I having dinner at that exact time, but he also knew exactly who prepared it. And I mean, what could I say? I was getting paid to enjoy a gourmet meal 2 times a week. How can that be a bad thing? I wasn't being tricked here. I saw the whole thing from start to finish. No matter if he made a paella or a chicken frittata, I'd see the whole thing. No tricks. So yeah, I agreed. Amy would have killed me if I didn't. She got all the leftovers she wanted. That, and she was a bit of a closeted Chef Mike fan. She followed his YouTube channel. Things changed rapidly after Chef Mike and I shook hands on this deal. He got all the new kitchenware for me and had a firm come by to clean. He put in this new hood over the stove and put in a wall-mounted spice rack. All custom jars, no labels necessary. On days when he came by, he would sometimes bring an assistant or a sous chef. He was taking it seriously. I can't count how many unnamed people came and went through my kitchen during those days. Some didn't even look like chefs, more like mercenaries. Deposits kicked up significantly. My max payout was somewhere around $3,200. It never dipped below $300. Still, having him around was more nerve-wracking. He had an absolutely shit temper, and he would blow up at Amy all the time. She would just be excited to have him there, and he would cuss her out for staring. It was heartbreaking watching her go from all excited to withdrawn. After a while, she would avoid coming out at all on days when he was there. All the while, I was still trying to understand our benefactor. I asked him to spell out his name, but all I got was N and O, 14 cents and 15 cents. Then, I decided I had to ask some big questions. Something that would take a long time to answer, but that I had to know. Despite knowing, it might take weeks to get the full picture. I painstakingly made a schedule to ask a question I couldn't stop thinking about. How can you see me? It took 8 days to get a complete answer. Every day I checked the deposit and the corresponding number of cents. I put up one posted a day until the answer was staring at me. 21, 18, 5, 25, 5, and 19. UREYES. Your eyes. I tried eating with my eyes closed, but that didn't seem to affect it at all. That confused me. Even if this thing could somehow experience things through my eyes, that didn't explain why it wanted me to eat. I started getting strange messages, not related to the questions I had asked. Letters that weren't a response to anything I asked. I could ask a yes or no question and get 4 cents, a D. Over the weeks that followed, I filled my fridge with all kinds of strange messages, all written on colorful post-its. Good taste, best tongue, more salt. Chef Mike shared that he was getting messages too, but he hadn't figured out if they had a meaning yet. It was only when I pointed it out that he realized he had started getting cents. He hadn't gotten those before. He wrote out all the cents he received in a number sequence and had me translate it while he cooked. This one says, "Can't see," I said, pointing to a series of post-its. This other one says, "Can't touch." So he can't touch and can't see, and he lives in South Dakota, and he sees things with other people's eyes. Chef Mike shuddered. He didn't like that. Amy was standing quiet in the corner, keeping her head down. He says I have a good tongue. The best, I added. What do you think that means? Well, Chef Mike sighed. Over the years I've worked with him, he made me perfect that one halibut dish as a sort of calibration. Maybe he was looking for someone to enjoy it the right way. But how does he know that I do? He shrugged. See through your eyes, taste through your tongue. Taking all I'd learned into account, I decided to dive deeper into another question. Why specifically at 6 p.m.? Why was that so important? The answer I got was as simple as it was infuriating. Dinner. I mean, it is like a pretty solid time for dinner. I asked what happened before that and why it couldn't be 5 p.m. Gym. The benefactor had a schedule: work, gym, dinner, woman, sleep. I got this impression of someone living vicariously through others, maybe literally. How else can you explain someone knowing I'm eating strawberries and cream in the dark and not just flushing them down the toilet? I shared my findings with Amy. All the post-its, the talks with Chef Mike, the experiments, the questions. I showed her my conclusions and suspicions, drawing it out on my iPad like I was mapping a conspiracy theory. Red lines from one circle to another, dates, answers. I had printed out pages of deposits and highlighted every cent. Just in case, I checked if the full dollar amount was anything too. It wasn't. And that rating, it was getting intricate. The benefactor had a very particular palate. It enjoyed beef the most. Well done, surprisingly. Grilled was a no-go, but it enjoyed the barbecue in various glazes. There was a little upshoot whenever I had a pleasant appetizer, and even more if I finished with a dessert. Chef Mike managed to break the record with a $4,100 deposit after serving me a 4-course meal. But man, it was awkward. I was just sitting there, savoring it, while Amy watched from the other side of the room. I could tell she was having second thoughts about this entire thing. I couldn't blame her, but we were talking about big, big money by now. This was daily income in the potential thousands. Finally, at one point, she just flat out asked me about all of it. We were driving home from the grocery store, and she had me pull over. It was almost dinner time. We'd gotten stuck in traffic, and I was a bit stressed, but I did as she asked. She put her hand on my shoulder. "I think we should stop," she said. "We got so much from this. There's got to be a problem with it. I don't feel comfortable doing this." "It's a lot of money." I agreed. "But can we afford to stop?" She nodded. "We got a lot, I know, and we can put that to good use, but when's enough? Didn't you want to be a dental technician?" "I am a dental technician," I insisted. "You spend more time on your charts and recipes," she said. "That's all of your time. It's income in the thousands, Amy, thousands. And what do they get from you that's worth that kind of money?" I didn't have an answer. My tongue felt dry. The clock was almost 6 p.m. I leaned back and smacked my seat. Amy recoiled a little, and I reached out to apologize. We were okay, it was just a lot. And I mean, yeah, she was right. I was being paid for something I didn't understand, and it was a lot of money. If I can't understand it, how can I consent to it? I decided to swallow my pride and agree with her. So that day, I skipped dinner, and for the next week, I kept that up. It was a bit strange stepping away from a strict schedule, and Chef Mike wasn't happy about it. He went back to making that halibut dish, looking for someone new to appease the benefactor. I would get these occasional messages like, "No one yet," and "You sure you still out?" The message that stuck with me the most was, "Do you know how lucky you are?" I stopped responding after a while. Amy was doing a lot better. We started eating together again, and we could be a bit more spontaneous. It was a load off my shoulders, but I would still catch myself wondering at times. Whenever 6 p.m. rolled around, was something looking through my eyes? Was it tasting my tongue? Had it moved on? There were no more deposits. It sucked not to have that income, but it was a strange thing to rely on to begin with. And I won't lie, it was convenient as hell, but there's something uncomfortable to it. I can't put my finger on it. But after 2 weeks of stepping away from the deal, something changed. I lost my job. I'm not saying I was the perfect employee, but I was doing a lot better now that I didn't have any distractions. It came out of nowhere. There were no mass layoffs or anything, it was just me. And on the same day as some nameless security carrying my stuff to my car, I get a text from Amy. She lost her job too. All of a sudden, that income is looking like a lifesaver, but I couldn't help but think, what if that's the point? What if this was orchestrated? How far can this benefactor reach? That night, Amy went to see her sister. The two of them are really close, and she needed some alone time. Meanwhile, I made some spaghetti and meatballs, and I sat down to eat at exactly 6 p.m. I remember sitting there at the kitchen table, eating in silence, looking at my iPad across the table. I'd written a question. Did you get us fired? 50 cents yes, 25 cents no. Every bite felt wrong, like someone was watching me from inside my mouth, like there was someone else sitting in the same space as my body, savoring me like a goddamn juice box. It felt like I was putting on a show, making myself into a canvas to be painted on, but I finished the meal. There was a deposit later that night, $480.50. That's a yes. It got us fired. I didn't tell Amy about it. She thought we'd gotten away from that whole ordeal, and now it was threatening to pull us back in. I wanted to give her some peace of mind, so I decided I was going to do something about it. I had a plan to get this benefactor out of our lives once and for all. One evening while she was out, I sat down at 6 p.m. with a new plan. I was going to make the benefactor turn away from me forever, and I could only see one way of doing that. I had lined up a plate with orange juice, toothpaste, diced onions, and mayonnaise. That and a spoon. I'd prepared an empty bucket next to me. My heart was making backflips as the clock crossed over to 6 p.m. When it did, I dug in and ate until I couldn't eat anymore. I ate, and I got violently ill. There were no deposits that night. For a few days, it seemed to work. I could eat at 6 p.m. without getting a deposit. It actually lightened my mood a lot. I didn't feel watched anymore. I think Amy noticed it too. She seemed a bit more at ease. Dinner time had become this unspoken stigma between us, but we'd started to look past it. We could joke about it, plan a little outing. We might even have dinner at 6 p.m. We moved back into a better routine. I took down the Post-its from the fridge. I deleted the document with all my findings. I'll admit it, I wasn't sure about that one. There's no harm in keeping a file on your computer, but then again, if I wanted to fully commit, I couldn't keep that stuff around. After much deliberation, I cleared it out. Things were looking up. I got a new job interview. Amy and I were looking at bigger apartments, hoping to find something within our price range. Not for now, but for when we both got back on our feet. But things don't always turn out like you want. It was the middle of the afternoon, and I'd spent my day talking to some old classmates. I was waiting for a response from a recruiter who'd shown some interest. I got out of my car at around 4 p.m., bringing some groceries along. The front door was open, so I figured Amy was at home. I did what I always did. I spoke out loud about my day. "Mark got a new job," I said. "Sounds like it wasn't just me that's been laid off." No response. "I got some turkey breast. I figured we could make some." I looked down at my grocery bag. Turns out someone had switched it. This wasn't what I'd bought. But for that to happen, they must have been in my car while I checked my phone. Looking up, there was a man in my living room. He was about 6'3", slim shoulders, thick horn-rimmed glasses, buzz cut, gray dress coat, simple blue jeans. Something in my blood froze when I saw him. I think I've seen him at Chef Mike's place. It was like coming face to face with a lion. All kinds of strange details just burned into my head. The way he laced his shoes, the silver ring on his left index finger, the slight hint of a scar on his neck, the tinted blue sunflower on the commercial rolling in the background. We just stared at each other for a second. I counted my breaths, trying to keep my brain from spiraling. I was making 100 plans at once, and they were all incomplete. Run, scream, shout, talk. Why aren't I talking? Do something. He burst into a sprint. I dropped my groceries and got about 5 steps before he caught my neck and pushed me down. I felt something cold, metallic and heavy, push against the back of my skull. "Not a word," he said. "Not a single damn word." The world turns black with a blindfold. I tried to listen for details, count my steps. There were more people, and they were trying to disorient me. They put a hood over my head and spun me around, pushing me to the ground a couple times. I couldn't figure out the direction we were going. They threw me in a car, a big one by the sound of it. No one was talking, but I figured they were at least 3 people, 2 up front, 1 in the back. The car ride was over 40 minutes, but we took a lot of turns. We might have been going in circles for a while. Once we came to a stop, they pulled me out and kept driving. I never even saw the car. Still, not a word from either of them. I was pulled inside a building and escorted down some stairs. A cellar. I was pushed into a cheap chair that scraped against an uneven stone floor. Then there was a voice. Time, 4:48. Clear out. People left the room. Another chair squeaked as someone sat across from me. They leaned in, making sure the chains on my hands were secured to the table. Let me tell you about my job. The silence was unbearable. I could barely hear him over my own breathing. I've had a job for 6 years, he said. Best job I've ever had. Before this, I was ready to bite a bullet. I had no purpose, no income, nothing. He tapped something against my head. Then, one day, a man walks past me, and I look at him a little longer than I usually do. He looks weird. He has a feel to him, and all of a sudden, I get $20. Just like that. So you know what I did? He leans in. I look a little closer. I follow him a little longer. Another 20. And you know what I find? This guy's a freak. He does some things that grown men ain't supposed to do. Things that hurt people. Good people. He leans back. Something metallic lands on the table. So instead of turning my gun on myself, I turn it on him. And I shit you not, 10 minutes later, I'm looking at a 5-figure payout out of goddamn nowhere. He taps the heavy object with his fingertips, spins it a little. Now I got a job. A very serious job. And I've learned to listen very, very well. And I don't ask questions. We sat there for a full hour. He had a wall clock that made this needlessly loud ticking noise so I wouldn't forget the seconds. I tried to calm my nerves and settle my breathing, but he would do something to constantly keep me on edge. I lost track of time completely after a while, and he was more than patient. Someone knocked on a door upstairs, a heavy door, metal and reinforced. The man got up from his chair. That's your cue, he said. It's showtime. I instantly recognized the voice as the door creaks open. Amy. They drag her down in chains, kicking and screaming. She yells my name. Not that I can do anything. It's like reaching for a teddy bear. She's just screaming to get the fear out, and it aches in me not to be able to do anything. The man has a gun. Something small clinks onto the table in front of me when he pulls off the blindfold. I'm sitting in a dark basement. There are 8 men in the room, all armed with submachine guns. They've chained Amy to the wall. They got her purse tangled up, so they cut the strap off with a Bowie knife. They're all masked. Black masks. Carbon fiber with felt over the eyes. They have different skin tones and build. No visible tattoos. There are 6 plates in front of me. A bacon and water chestnut appetizer. Caesar salad with a mild cheese. Lightly fried halibut with hollandaise sauce and collard greens. Rice balls with spicy mayonnaise served with steak tenderloin. A turkey burger slider. And a small cup of chocolate lava cake for dessert. 3 perfectly placed glasses of red wine, water, and white wine. Amy is screaming herself to death. I can hear her voice breaking. I realize one of the men are behind me, and he's holding something. I can hear a leather strap just inches from the back of my head. He's pointing something at me. Once the clock turns to 6 p.m., one of the men nod at me. Bon appetit. I take my time with the dishes. I don't want to give them an excuse to shoot me in the back of my head. It all tastes like salt anyway. I must have bitten my tongue when they attacked me. The wine burns my tongue, and my eyes water. A little blood drizzles out of the corner of my lips. Amy is a mess. She's on her knees, repeating please over and over like a mantra. She is terrified of strangers, and the claustrophobia isn't helping. No one is budging. They're not even looking at her. I take bite after bite, knowing full well that I'm being looked at from the inside out. He can taste the salt on my tongue. He can feel the pieces sliding down my gullet. He can feel my nervous stomach rumbling as I force myself to chew. How can he want this? One of the men checks their watch. Send the chef home. Have our guests finish in 10 minutes or kill the girl. Make it a challenge. The man standing behind me huffs, grabs my head, and smashes it into the table. The table cracks a little. Cheap plastic, probably stolen from a yard. He doesn't have a gun. He has some kind of pop rivet. He's not killing me. He's going to hurt me. Bad. It takes a moment to register the pain. He pulls out my tongue and pierces it with the rivet. Start the clock. I can't feel my tongue. My eyes water. I try to eat without chewing, but the salts feel like sticking my mouth into a wall socket. I bite, chew, and swallow. Bite, chew, swallow. I'm a machine. I'm doing this. Pain doesn't kill you, but by God, it's the worst I've ever felt. It's supposed to be good. It smells nice, but it sticks to my stomach lining like a cold sore. They're gonna kill her. I can see the gun. They're gonna kill her. I finish with a couple minutes to spare. I almost choke on the white wine. I knocked over a couple of plates, and it looked like someone fed it all to a starving dog. I had barbecue glaze on my fingers. Hands are faster than forks. Looks good, one of them said. Hope you enjoyed your meal. Another one leaned in from behind, tapping me on my shoulder with an automatic weapon. What time are you having dinner tomorrow? He asked. It wasn't really a question. It would never be a question again. 6 p.m. I got $25. No cents. I still have my dinner at 6 p.m. to this day, and I'd like to say Amy and I have found some kind of normalcy in all this, but she turns pale every time I walk away to eat. We don't talk about it. We talk about everything but that. I've started getting deposits again, not as big as I used to, but still significant. I've noticed I get a bit more if Amy is in the room, watching in silence. I've tried thinking about it in other ways, like I'm not a captive in my own body, but maybe an influencer to an audience of one, or a curator, a reviewer. Maybe there's some magical thing I can do that will grant me some kind of lenience. I don't know, but for now, I don't have any options. Every day, I step away from whatever I'm doing, and I have dinner, and I have it at exactly 6 p.m. Yeah, at the beginning of the story, it even says, oh, that's not weird. People eat at 6 p.m. on the dot. All the time. People always do that. Yeah, not in this guy's case. There's actually a person that can see through your eyes and taste what you're tasting somehow. Oh yeah, and you and your girlfriend are also getting kidnapped. The next story is from r/snowsleep from user Grand Theft Motto. Something walks whistling past my house every night at 3:03. Alright, yeah, just sell the house and move far away. Every night, no matter the weather, something walks down our street, whistling softly. You can only hear it if you're in the living room or the kitchen when they walk by it, and it starts exactly at 3:03. The sound starts faint, somewhere near the beginning of the lane near the Carson place. We're towards the middle of the street, so the whistling moves past us before fading away in the direction of the cul-de-sac. When I was younger, my sister and I would sneak into the kitchen some nights to listen. Mom and Dad didn't like that, and we'd catch hell if they found us out there, but they were never too hard on us since we always stuck to the one big rule. Don't try to look at whatever was whistling. My neighborhood is a funny place. I've lived here since I was 6, and I love it. The houses are small but well kept, good-sized yards, plenty of places to roam. There are a lot of other kids here my age. I turned 13 back in October. We grew up together and would always play foursquare in the cul-de-sac or roam around from back porch to back porch in the summer. This was a good place to grow up. I'm old enough to see it. And there's only the two strange things here, the night whistling and the good luck. What? The whistling never bothered me much. Like I said, I couldn't even hear it from my bedroom, but Mom and Dad don't like talking about it, so I've stopped asking questions. My dad is a strong guy, tall and calm. He has an accent since he moved here to the U.S. as a kid. His family, my grandparents, they're from the islands. That's what they call it. My dad, the only time he isn't so calm is if the whistler comes up. He talks a little quicker then. Eyes move faster, and he tells us not to think about it so much and to always remember the one rule. The big rule. Don't try to look outside when the whistler goes past. Not that we could look even if we wanted. See, there are shutters on the inside of every window, thick pieces of heavy canvas that pull down from the top and latch to the bottom of the window frame. Each latch even has a small lock, about the size of what you'd find on a diary. My dad locks those shutters every night before we all go to bed and keeps the key in his room. My mom, I don't know what she thinks about the whistling. I've seen her out in the living room before at 3:03 when the sound starts. I could see her if I cracked my door open just an inch to peek. She's not out there often, at least I haven't caught her much, but once or twice a month I think she sits out there on our big red couch just listening. The Whistler has the same tune every night. It's cheerful, honestly. Remember how I said there are two odd things about where I live? Well, besides our night whistler, everyone in my neighborhood is really lucky. It's hard to explain, and Dad doesn't like us talking about this part much either, but good things just seem to happen to people around here a lot. Usually it's small things, winning a radio contest, or getting an unexpected promotion at work, or finding some arrowheads buried in the yard. You know, the authentic kind. The weather is pretty good, and there's no crime, and everyone's gardens bloom extra bright in the fall. A million little blessings. I've heard my mom say about living here. But the main reason we stay here, why we moved here in the first place, is my sister Nola. She was born very sick. Something with her lungs. We couldn't even bring her home when she was born, only visit her in the hospital. She was very small, I remember. Small even compared to other babies. A machine had to breathe for her. We moved into our house here to be closer to the hospital. As soon as we moved here, Nola started getting better. The doctors couldn't figure it out. They chalked it up to whatever they were doing, but we all could tell they were confused. But my parents knew, even I knew, Nola getting better was just another one of the million little blessings we got for living in our neighborhood. So that's why we stayed, even after we found that out. For every small miracle that happens here, every day, now and then, some bad things happen. But they only happen if you look for the Whistler. See, our neighborhood has a welcoming committee. They show up with macaroni casserole and a gift basket and a manila folder whenever someone new moves in. They're very friendly. 4 people showed up when we moved in 7 years ago. The committee made small talk, gave me a Snickers bar, and took turns holding Nola. It was her first week out of the hospital, so they were extra careful. Then the committee asked to speak to my parents in private, so I was sent to my room where I still managed to hear nearly every word. The welcoming committee told my parents about how nice the neighborhood was. Really exceptionally hard to explain kind of nice. And then they told my parents about the even harder to explain whistling that happened every morning at 3:03 and ended at the tick of 3:05. The group, our new neighbors, warned my parents that the whistling was quiet, would never harm or hurt us, as long as we didn't look for what was making the sound. This part they stressed, and I pushed my ear into the door, straining to hear them. People who went looking for the Whistler had their luck change, sometimes tragically. A black cloud would hang over anyone that looked. Anything that could go wrong would. The manila envelope the committee brought over contained newspaper clippings, stories about car crashes and ruined lives, public deaths, and freak accidents. Not everyone dies, I heard the head of the committee tell my dad. But the life goes out of them. Even if they live, there's no light in them ever again. No presence. My mom, I could tell she wasn't taking it seriously. She kept asking if this was some prank they play on new neighbors. At one point, my mom got angry, accused the committee of trying to scare us out of our new home, asked them if they were racist on account of my dad being from the islands. My dad calmed her down, told her he could tell our new neighbors were sincere and they were just trying to help us. He explained that he grew up hearing these kinds of stories from his mom and that he knew there were some strange things that walked among us. Some of those strange things were good and some were bad, but most were just different. After the committee left, Dad went out to the hardware store, bought canvas blinds, the latches, and the locks, and installed them on every window in the house after dinner. That first night in our new house, I crept out of my room at 3 a.m., only to find my dad awake sitting on the living room couch, holding my baby sister. My dad held up his finger in a shh motion, but patted the couch next to him. I sat and we waited. At exactly 3:03, we heard the whistling. It came and it went, just like our neighbors said. The whistling returns each night, and we never look, and we enjoy our million little blessings every day. Nola breathes on her own, and she's grown into a strong, clever girl. My dad even joined the welcoming committee. We don't get new neighbors often. Why would anyone want to leave? But when a new family moves in, my dad and the committee bring them the macaroni casserole and a gift basket and the manila folder. I can always tell by the look on my dad's face when he comes back if the family took the committee seriously or if we'd be getting new neighbors again very soon. Not long ago, a family moved in across the street from us. The previous owner, Miss Maddie, passed away at age 105. She lived a good, long life. Our new neighbors seemed like they'd fit in just fine. They believed the welcoming committee, took my dad's advice about the locking shutters since they had a young child of their own. Whatever newspaper clippings were in that manila envelope, whatever evidence, my dad never let us see. But I imagine it must have been awfully convincing since our neighbors got along with no issues for the first month. One night, when our new neighbors had to leave town, they sent their son, Holden, to stay with us. He was 12, a year under me in school. I didn't know him well before that night, but as soon as his parents dropped him off after dinner, I could tell it was going to be a bad time. "Do you know who's always out there whistling every night?" Holden asked the moment the adults left the room. The three of us were sitting in the den, some Disney movie playing idly on the television. My sister and I exchanged a glance. "We don't talk about that," I said. "I think it's that weirdo that lives in the big yellow house in the corner," Holden said. "Mr. Tolles?" my sister asked. "No way, he's really nice." Holden shrugged. "Must be a psycho killer then." "Me too, kid. I'd have the same reaction." Nola tensed. "We don't talk about it," I repeated. "Let's go in my room and play Nintendo." We spent the next few hours playing games, eating popcorn, and then watching movies. A typical sleepover, but I could see Holden was getting antsy. After my parents had wished us a good night, locked the blinds, and gone to bed, Holden stood up from his beanbag and walked over to where Nola and I were sitting on my bed. "Have you ever even tried looking?" he asked. "It's nearly time." Like most sleepovers, we'd conveniently ignored any suggestion of a bedtime. I was shocked to see he was right. It was almost 3 a.m. I sighed. "We don't... See, I can't even try to look because my dad locks the blinds every night and hides the key," he continued, ignoring me. "So does our dad," said Nola. "No," replied Holden. "No, he doesn't." "You saw him do it," I said, a little sharper than I meant to sound. Holden grinned. "Your dad locks the blinds, yeah, but he doesn't hide the key. He keeps it right on his normal keychain." "So?" I asked, worried I already knew what he would say next. Because I had noticed that my dad didn't bother hiding the key anymore after all these years, because he knew we took it seriously. "So after your dad locked up, but before your parents went to bed, I went to the bathroom, and on my way, I may have peeked into their room, and I may have seen your dad's keychain on his nightstand, and I maybe went and borrowed the key to the blinds." Nola and I stared, and his grin only grew wider. "You're lying," I said. Holden shrugged. "You can check if you want. Just open your parents' door and look. You'll see his keychain right there on the nightstand." "Stay here," I told both of them. "Don't move a muscle." I hurried over to my parents' room, but hesitated at the door. If Holden wasn't lying, my dad would be angry. Beyond angry. I was scared thinking about it, but more scared of an open window with the whistler right outside. I opened the door, barely an inch, and looked in, but it was too dark to see. Taking a breath, I walked into the room. 2 steps into the dark and I froze. The whistling started, and I could hear it clearly, from my parents' room. I never realized, but they must have heard the sound every night since we moved into the house. They never told us. I don't think I could have slept through it. I stood there, listening to the whistling come closer, unsure whether I should turn on a light or call out for my dad. Soft sounds from the living room brought me back to reality. "Nola," I yelled, running out of my parents' room. Holden and Nola were standing near the front door next to a window. Holden wasn't lying. I could see him fumbling with the lock on one of the blinds. I heard a click. He did have the key. Holden let out a quick laugh. Nola stood next to him, hunched up, afraid but maybe curious. The whistling was right outside our house now. "I think I made a sound," called out. I can't remember. Time felt frozen, clock hands nailed to the face, but I found myself moving. I'm not fast. I've never been athletic. Somehow, though, I covered the space between myself and Nola in a moment. My eyes were locked on her, but I heard Holden pull the blind all the way down so it could release. I heard the snap of it start to raise, and I heard the whistling just on the other side of the window. But I had my arms around Nola, and I turned us so she was facing away from the window. At the same time, I jammed my eyes shut. The blind whipped open. The whistling stopped. I felt Nola shaking in my arms. "Don't look, okay?" I told her. "Don't turn around." We were positioned so that she was facing back towards the hallway and I was facing the window. My eyes were still closed. I felt her nod into my shoulder. I reached out with the arm not holding Nola and tried to touch Holden. My hand brushed against his arm. He was shaking worse than Nola. "Holden?" I asked. Silence. I reached past him and gingerly felt for the window, eyes still sealed shut. The glass was cold against my fingertips, colder than it should have been for the time of year. I moved my hand up the window, searching for the string to the blind. The glass began to get warmer the further I reached, and there was a gentle hum feeding back into my fingertips. I tried not to think about what might be on the other side of the window. Finally, I touched the string and yanked the blind shut. I opened my eyes. In the dim light leaking out from the kitchen, I could make out Holden, pale and small, staring at the now closed window. "Holden?" I asked again. He turned towards me and he screamed. Everything became a flurry of motion. Lights sparked to life in the hall, then the living room. My parents' footsteps thudded across the hardwood floor. I didn't turn to look back at them. My eyes were glued to Holden. He was pale, had bit his lips so hard there was a thin red line of blood running down his chin, and he'd wet himself. "What happened?" my dad asked from behind me. I managed to swivel away from Holden and look back. He looked. I'd never seen my dad scared before, but I saw it that night, in that moment, an old, ugly terror stitched on his face. A parent's fear. "Just Holden?" he mouthed to me. I nodded yes. My dad let out a breath. He looked so relieved I nearly expected him to cheer, but then he turned to Holden and my dad's face changed. I wonder if he felt bad for feeling good that Holden was the only one that looked. There was a knock at the door. We all froze. Holden whimpered. "Don't answer it," my mom said. She stood at the threshold of the hall. I'd always thought she was a skeptic and just humored my dad about the windows and the whistler, but that night we were all believers. I noticed that both of my parents held baseball bats they must have taken from their bedroom. The knock came again, a little louder this time. "Please don't open the door," Holden whispered. My dad walked over to him, hugged him close. "We won't," my dad promised, still holding his bat. "Nothing is coming in here tonight." Thud, thud, thud. This time the knocking was loud enough to rattle the door. Holden screamed again, and Nola clutched her arms around my neck. My mom came over and knelt down next to us, wrapping my sister and me close. The knock came again, even louder. "Call the police," my mom whispered to my dad. The knocking instantly stopped. My dad looked over his shoulder at us. "Do you think?" He was cut off by frantic knocking that trailed off to a polite tap, tap, tap. "Police," something said from the other side of the door. The voice from the outside sounded exactly like my mom, like a parrot repeating the words back to her. "Police, call the police, tap, 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 police." My mom pulled us closer. "Please stop," I heard her whisper. "I don't think calling them will help," my dad said. "How will we know when they're the ones at the door?" The knocking came back harder than before. The door shook, then it stopped. After a long moment, I heard the knocking again, but it was coming from our back door. We all turned together towards the back door, but the knocking immediately returned to the front door. Front to back to front. Loud, then quiet, then loud again. Suddenly, the sound was coming from both doors at once. Big, heavy blows like a sledgehammer. Then something started rapping against all of the windows in the house. Then the walls. It was like we were living inside a drum with a dozen people trying to play at once. Or we were a turtle and something was attempting to claw us out of our shell. "Stop!" Holden yelled. The knocking died. "I won't tell," Holden said, staring at the door. "I promise I won't tell anyone what I saw. Please just go away." We waited for nearly a minute. Then we heard it. A soft tap coming from the window Holden had looked through earlier. Holden started to cry, sobbing like a prisoner watching gallows being built outside their cell. My dad held him, brushed his hair, but never lied to him. Never told him things would be okay. The tapping at the window went on for the rest of the night. We huddled together in the living room for I don't know how long. Eventually, my mom tried to take us kids into my room while my dad stayed to watch the door. But the second we moved into my bedroom, the knocking came back, so loud it was impossible to ignore. I was afraid the door couldn't take it. We went back to the living room and the knocking stopped. Only the tap, tap, tap on the window remained. None of us slept that night. The tapping stopped around 7 a.m. That's about the time the sun comes up here. We waited another 2 hours before my dad opened the blinds from one window. He made us all go back to my parents' bedroom first. I heard him open the door, then come back in. Okay, he told us, it's done. Holden's parents came back around lunchtime. My mom and dad walked Holden over to his house, and they all went inside for quite a while. Nola and I watched from the window. She stuck to me the whole day, right at my side, sometimes holding my hand. When my parents came back, they looked grim, but wouldn't tell us what they said to Holden's family. It was a Sunday, so we all spent the day together, ordered pizza and watched movies. That night, everyone slept in my room. Nola and my mom in the bed with me, my dad in a chair he'd pulled over. There was no knocking that night, or any night since. We didn't see much of Holden or his parents for the rest of that week, but by Thursday, there was a moving truck in their driveway. Nola and I watched them packing up the whole afternoon after school. What sticks with me the most is how tired Holden and his parents looked. All three had the same pallor, grim mouths, and lightless eyes. Even from across the street, I could tell something was very wrong. Holden and his family were gone before sunset. I remember what the original welcoming committee said to my parents when we moved in. Not everyone who looks at the Whistler dies, but even those that live have the light go out of them, and the rest of their lives are full of misfortune. A million little tragedies. I think Holden's parents must have looked, either to comfort him if they didn't believe, or share the burden if they did. I watch Nola some days, happy and young and alive, and I wonder if I'd been slower, if she would have looked out the window that night. Would I have looked too, to comfort her, to share that burden? I'm glad I don't have to find out. We still live in that house, in that neighborhood. We still hear our Whistler walking past every night. The blessings, the luck, the good things here are too good to leave. But we're careful. We don't have any friends over to spend the night anymore. And my dad hides the key to the blinds very, very well. Not that I've gone looking. Some things you just don't need to look for. The reason I included this one is because this could just be somebody, like the last one, that where someone has to eat at 6 p.m. Like maybe they just really like eating at 6 p.m. Maybe there's some old man that likes going on walks at exactly 3 a.m. And then by 3:03, he's whistling, walking past his neighbor's house. Yeah, I don't know. It starts off kind of normal and then it goes downhill from there. The next one's from r/no sleep from user Saturdead. It's titled 3 Days in the Dark. When I was 8 years old, my brother Elliot went missing. He was just 13 years old, but older siblings have this aspirational quality to them. He just didn't come home one day. They looked for days, but couldn't find any trace of him. I was too young to understand what was going on, so I had to sit in my room and play with my Legos, hoping there'd be a knock on the door telling me things would be okay. There never was that kind of knock. They didn't find him. As days turned to weeks, the search party stopped. But even after everyone went home, I was still out looking for him. I'd take the long road home from school. I'd go down paths I hadn't checked. I had a crumbled up map in my pocket with circles around places that I knew he liked, and I was hell-bent on checking all of them. People don't just disappear. It doesn't work like that. But after a while, there were no places left to check, no circles left to draw, and Elliot was still gone. Last thing he said to me was, "Later, Gator." I don't think you ever truly come to terms with something like that. Once you've run into an impossible question, you look for answers in everything. I got really into puzzles and brain teasers. Not because it was fun, but because leaving unsolved mysteries could give me this immense sense of dread. I was a great student and one of the top contenders in the debate club. Again, not because I enjoyed it, but because I hated not knowing. When I got a little older, I started volunteering for search and rescue parties. I'd make myself known with local law enforcement and inform them that I'd gladly volunteer. I figured if I couldn't find Elliot, perhaps finding someone else's missing sister or brother was the second best thing. At the very least, it could help me sleep at night. I know there's a lot of people saying, get over it, but you can only get over so much. I'm in my early 30s now. You can forget their face and the hopes you had growing up, but you can't forget the impact they had on you. You can't forget your own lived experience and the damage those years of uncertainty have left. Even if I never were to hear the name Elliot again, I can never forget the feeling of having the trajectory of my life take a sudden turn left. I'd like to talk about a search party I signed up for a couple years back. At the time, I'd been part of dozens of organized searches. I knew some of the people involved, and I was familiar with the gear. I got there early, taking some time off work. I put on the high visibility vest, the gloves, and the backpack. Radio, water, flashlight, a couple of chocolate bars, a first aid kit, and a waterproof bag. Now, I'd never found someone on a search like that, but that didn't mean I never would. You must believe in the best case scenario. We weren't handed a GPS, which surprised me. Turns out we were going underground, so we were handed these filtration masks to protect us from harmful dust and dead air. The missing person was a 17-year-old urban explorer. I live in a city with a metro system, and he'd been exploring an abandoned station on the outskirts of town. The family had been notified of a social media post pointing at the approximate location, but the details were sketchy. To help with the search, power had been restored to this part of the tunnels. Most of the emergency lights were meant to last for years, so there shouldn't be too much of a problem getting around. We were assigned into sections and teams where we were instructed to only follow lit-up corridors and hallways. However, as parts of the station had been abandoned mid-construction, there would be dark sections that were unfinished. If we found such an area, we were ordered to call it in and ask for further instructions. And with that, we were off. I was a bit miffed about not getting to see the abandoned station platform. That thing was supposed to be huge. Instead, I was assigned to one of the maintenance tunnels. It was originally meant to house heating pipes, but the pipes were never added. Instead, there were these lines across the wall and the occasional holes in the ceiling. You could tell they must have been surprised about the project shutting down. I found a whole toolbox abandoned by a half-mounted door. There were some personal items still in it. I was in a team of 4 people. We went down the hall slowly and methodically, calling out to the missing person as we went. We stuck to our side of the search and kept in radio contact with the organizer. It was hard to see what all the spaces were supposed to be, as we'd occasionally come across entire rooms with little to nothing in them. It made it hard to explain what we'd checked, as we couldn't accurately describe what was what. Was this supposed to be a control room or some kind of plumbing junction? Where on the map exactly was this supposed to be? We came to an unusually long corridor that split off in 3 directions. While staying within earshot, we decided to split up. I got all the way to the end of the hallway, where I stopped by a heavy door. The thing was almost solid black, and as heavy as cast iron. I got the impression that it was some kind of security door, maybe leading to an underground bomb shelter. I called out to the others in my team, but didn't get a response. I called it in on the radio as I wrestled with the door. It was pitch black inside. The lights were out. Sidebar, guys. Why do people split up? Like, when you split up, something's just obviously going to go wrong. I'm looking at a dark room at the end of the hallway. C, I think? The one on the right. Second right, past the boilers. Just stay within radio contact and leave the door open, the operator responded. Don't go so far you can't see the light. Got it. I entered the room. The room was a little smaller than the hallway, tickling the top of my head when I stood upright. If I balanced on my toes, I could feel the strap from the mask touch the ceiling. I tried to figure out what the space was meant for, but I couldn't make sense of it. There was only one entry point, and there were no holes in the wall for cable management or ventilation. This was completely isolated. I tapped the radio again, swaying my flashlight back and forth. There's a corridor going deeper, I said. Is someone watching my back? Yeah, there's someone right outside, the operator assured me. You go on ahead. I took a couple of steps further, shining my flashlight down the hall. The light couldn't reach the end of it. It was such a long tunnel that it triggered my sense of vertigo. Like, for a split second, it was sucking me in. I had this uncomfortable thought that maybe this was the feeling of going missing. Facing this endless darkness you can't come back from. Maybe Elliot had thought the same thing once. I didn't like it. I was only a couple of feet from the door, but I decided I wouldn't take any chances. I turned to leave. And as I did, the door swung shut. At first, I didn't register what had happened. A door closing isn't a big thing. It might be misaligned, or maybe there could have been a breeze. This wasn't the case here. The door was solid metal. It wouldn't accidentally close on its own. I grabbed the handle and twisted and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. I couldn't even push it down. I'm stuck, I radioed in. The door closed. I can't get it open. Sorry about that. It happens, the operator sighed. Some of the hinges on these things are rusted shut. Stay by the door. Someone will get you out. Keep your flashlight on. I stayed by the door for at least 20 minutes, knocking on it occasionally just to see if anyone would knock back. They didn't. After a while, my flashlight flickered. It was far too soon for the batteries to die. Okay, I'm going dark here, I said. Someone needs to get me out now. They're having trouble finding your door, the operator responded. Far end of the right side hall, section C, past the boiler. That's what you said? That's right. There's no door here. There's an open door frame in something that looks like a closet, but no door. That's impossible. Look, you might have the wrong order. If you went past the boilers, you could be in section C or D. There are parallel corridors. In that case, you can just follow the right-hand wall until you get to the other side. There's another search party already there. Right-hand wall, other corridor. Got it. I followed their instructions, grasping the dying flashlight. As I got to the seemingly endless tunnel, the light finally gave out. It was pitch black. I could close my eyes and nothing would change. Being in that kind of darkness is so disorienting. You start to imagine how easy it is to get turned around, to the point where you're wondering if you really are turned around. But I kept my hand on the wall and stuck to the right. Is it far? I asked. I can't hear them. It's a bit of a walk. There should be some functioning pipes running overhead about halfway through, so let me know as soon as you hear running water. I couldn't hear anything but my own breathing reverberating down the hall, but if there was running water down there, I wouldn't miss it for the world. I kept my hand on the smooth concrete wall and continued a step at a time. You have to go slow, as even the slightest shift in elevation can send you crashing face first into the ground. When you're exposed to that kind of prolonged darkness, your head kind of fills in the blanks. You start to imagine what the space around you looks like. It plays tricks on you. For example, I started thinking I was running my hand across wallpaper instead of concrete. It was smooth enough that, while walking, you might trick yourself. But if you're just using your fingertips to see the world, you can imagine yourself in all kinds of places. My childhood home had a rough, paper-textured wallpaper. It didn't take a huge leap of imagination to pretend I was back there, sneaking up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. I ended up taking my gloves off just to get a better idea of what I was touching. I got to a fork in the road and still hadn't heard any running water. I pulled up the radio and called it in. There's a split here, I said. Should I stay right or go straight ahead? A split? The operator called back. There shouldn't be a split. Are you sure? Yeah, there's a split. Straight ahead or another right? Wait, the voice mumbled back. Wait. Don't tell me. Is the ceiling really low? Yes. Why didn't you say so? Oh man, this changes things. I could hear them talking to someone in the background, forgetting to take their hand off the button. Then they returned to me. This is gonna get complicated. Turns out there were 3 other rooms with the same description as mine, and neither of them were in sections I described. I must have veered far off course. I had to walk around to gather data points to identify which of the rooms I was in, but it proved more difficult than they'd imagined. For example, one of the corridors was supposed to lead to a junction, and another would lead to a ceiling grate. However, the room at the end of the corridor was incomplete, meaning we couldn't tell what it was supposed to be. I had to go deeper to figure out where I was. I would occasionally run into ladders, but they led nowhere. There were supposed to be entrances from the street, but these had long since been filled and paved. I still had to climb each one just to make sure they hadn't missed one. The mask on my face felt more and more oppressive, like my body was packed into a box. Despite being able to move my arms around, I could feel this claustrophobic stone building in my chest, hammering a countertune to my increasing heartbeat. If I listened to it too much, I couldn't breathe. I pushed myself down another corridor, only to stop at a dead end. There was a round hole in the wall, just big enough for someone my size. That's good, the operator assured me. That means there's space for heating. If my calculations are correct, that means you're in one of these 2 hallways. I need you to go inside. No way. It's going to tilt downward for about 5 feet and either go straight ahead or upward. If it goes upward, you can go straight to the top. I can have someone meet you right then and there. If it goes forward, you have to go ahead, then take a left, and then forward again. That'd put you in the same corridor as me. Either way, you have to push through. I put one knee up and traced the edges of the hole. It was too small for me to crawl on all 4s. I had to put my torso in and drag myself forward with the palm of my hands. The concrete was so smooth I couldn't get a grip with my fingers, gloves or no gloves. My gear kept getting snagged on the edges. I stopped to have a drink of water and splashed a little on my face, psyching myself up. 5 feet, then up or forward. That was it. I crawled in, inches at a time. I had to stay calm. If I tried to take a deep breath, I could feel my gear pushing against the walls. It didn't hurt, but it was this constant reminder of how isolated I was. My heart was beating through my ears, with nothing to distract from it. There wasn't the slightest hint of an echo. I felt the tunnel tilt slightly downward. Not much, but enough that pushing myself back up would be impossible. If I went ahead, I wouldn't be getting back up. Not unless I got space to turn around. You sure it's just a couple feet? I asked. You absolutely sure? There are only 2 rooms with that kind of vent. No matter which one you're in or which direction you're coming from, you'll be out shortly. I swallowed. I could feel the sweat stinging my eyes. I wanted to throw my mask away, like that was the thing keeping me back, but I had to stay rational. I pushed myself forward and slid downward. The tunnel evened out. I felt around for an upward exit, but couldn't find one. That meant we'd isolated exactly where I was, and I had to push forward. My palms were so dusty that I could barely get a grip. I had to resort to rolling onto my back and using the rubber soles on my shoes for traction, effectively kicking myself backward. I could feel the heat of my breath gathering along the tunnel walls. Then the tunnel opened. It was so sudden that I lost my balance, haphazardly falling out head first. I did an awkward flip, landing hard on my left hip and shoulder. It wasn't a long fall, but enough for something to get sprained. I didn't want to imagine what the bruise might look like. I grabbed my radio and held onto it for dear life. "I'm out," I groaned. "I made it to a room." "There's only one way forward," the operator said. "Go forward, then a left, and forward again. Once you see the light, let me know. I'm right at the other end." "That's it? That's really it? There's no other possible way." I got up, dusted myself off, and checked my gear. It was all there. Things would be okay. I followed the instructions. I went forward and took a left. At the next fork, I went straight forward, double-checking with the operator every step of the way. They assured me it was just around the corner. A matter of minutes at most. At one point, he said he was banging a wrench on a pipe, and that I would be able to hear it any minute now. Now I just had to go straight, until I came to a door. I was jogging, keeping my hand on the wall for balance. There were these small gaps in the wall every 10 feet or so, where there was supposed to be space for pipes. I'd walk, feel the gap, walk, feel the gap, over and over. Then I dragged my hand across someone's face. Open eyes, a nose, teeth, and hair. I stopped and turned around, my hand shaking like I'd touched a flame. "Is anyone there?" I asked. There was no answer. I debated within my own head, trying to figure out if I should head back and check again, or keep going. Maybe it was the missing person? We were still out looking for someone after all. The search hadn't been called off. I took a couple of steps back and carefully reached out with my right hand. My fingers were anticipating the touch of skin, to the point where I could imagine their heat, but as I reached further, all I felt was concrete. There was no one there. I checked thoroughly, but there was nothing. I did hear a little metallic sound, though, as something stuck to my shoe. A small key. It had some kind of etched motif, like a sunflower. Maybe a blue one. I put it in my pocket with the first aid kit and kept going, making sure I hadn't been turned around. As I got to the end of the hallway, I reached for the door. "All right, this is it," I said. "I can't hear you, but I'm at the end of the hall. There's a door there. Just open it and I'll have someone come meet you." I fumbled around looking for a handle, but couldn't find one. I checked that wall 3 times, every inch of it. It was a dead end. "There's nothing here," I gasped. "There's nothing here." "Calm down. It should be on your left." "There's nothing on my left. Nothing on my right. It's a dead end. It's a goddamn..." I smacked my head with the radio and heard a click. Not as in something breaking, but something clicking into place. I turned the radio over in my hand, feeling around the back. The battery cover had been slightly off. That hit put it back in place. I opened the cover just to make sure I closed it correctly, and there were no batteries in the radio. I double and triple checked. There were no batteries. "Hello?" I asked. "Operator?" I held the radio up to my lips, clicking the receiver a couple of times. There was no sound, just the clack of plastic. "Hello?" There was no response. I collapsed against the wall, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. It didn't make sense. The battery cover had been closed even when I smacked my head with the radio. I would have heard 2 batteries tumbling to the floor. I couldn't have lost them earlier, as then the operator couldn't have talked to me in the corridor. Something wasn't adding up. I swept my hands across the floor, checking to see if the batteries were there somewhere. They weren't. But I couldn't just sit in the dark and wait either. I had to do something. Try something. This was another puzzle to figure out. There's always a solution, and sometimes you just have to make the best of the hand you're dealt. By this time, I'd drawn a mental map. All these years of figuring things out had conditioned me to collect and preserve information. It was like recounting the alphabet backwards. I just had to follow a learned sequence. I decided I was going to backtrack and try to find my way back to where I started. I made my way back to the hole in the wall and climbed inside. The upward tilt would be difficult, but I was confident that I could make it. I crawled, holding my hands out, only to feel the tunnel dip downward. I stopped dead in my tracks, my mind spinning. This was impossible. I'd been crawling down. It couldn't possibly lead further down. I crawled a little further, reaching with a full arm. This couldn't have been where I came from. Were there 2 separate tunnels? That was the only explanation. I pushed myself all the way back out, but couldn't find a second hole in the wall. I figured I must have been turned around somewhere, taken a wrong turn, went straight instead of right at a split, or something like that. I had to slowly and methodically map out my surroundings, one room and hallway at a time. It's easy to second-guess yourself in the dark. You have nothing to rely on but your thoughts and impressions, and those are easy to misunderstand. It can be challenging even in a familiar environment. Ask anyone who's had to go to the bathroom during a power outage. I was somewhere deep underground, in an unmapped area, without light or direction. I must have wandered for hours. I mapped out 2 branching corridors leading to 3 rooms and 4 dead ends. There were no doors, and only one hole in the wall leading to a tunnel. And yes, I checked it again. It kept going downward. No, I didn't proceed that way. I ended up in one of the smaller rooms, rolling up my high visibility vest into a pillow. I drank some water, but saved some for later, and chowed down on a chocolate bar. The others were probably looking for me by now. I tried not to think about the radio. That was a piece of the puzzle that made my stomach roll. No matter how I twisted and turned that thought, I couldn't get it to make sense. If it was empty all along, I was the problem. If it wasn't empty until that last click of the battery cover, there had to be batteries on the floor. I couldn't find any, but that didn't mean there weren't any. And yet, I didn't have a clear answer. I ended up spending the night down there. It's difficult to sleep in that kind of darkness. After a while, you don't know if your eyes are opened or closed. You don't know if you're sleeping or not. The barrier between imagination and reality is paper thin, and you start thinking whatever you dream about is really there. There could be someone in the room, just inches away, and I would have no way to know for sure. It was the first time in many years that I thought about Elliot. Not just the reality of him going missing, but him as a person. I imagined what he might have felt like during those last few hours, or days. Had there been someone with him, or had he faded away in the dark? He and I had always been very similar. Chances are we would think the same thing in our final moments, and if this was one of my final moments, I was scared. He would be too. I tried not to think about it. There was no way to know for sure, and imagining the worst wasn't helping anyone. He could have run away, eloped with a pretty girl, and lived in some hippie co-op. He might resurface in 20 years. You can't tell the future. But somehow, a part of me felt like it knew. It knew he'd gone someplace dark, where he could never come back. Maybe it was the next day, or just a couple of hours, but at some point, I got up. I decided I was going to check the tunnel again. There must have been some kind of misunderstanding. I drank my last gulp of water and followed the map in my mind. The layout was different. There were more rooms and shorter corridors. If you took 2 lefts, there were a couple of stairs. There was a larger room with a rounded floor for draining liquid. I would go down the same hallway twice, and I could swear it was different lengths. I would count my steps and end up with the same result, but one would take a minute to pass, and the next it would take 2. I felt like I was losing my mind. Every time I tried to make clear sense of that place, it seemed to shift and change. Like it wasn't finished, in more ways than one. Like an approximation of space and dimension. After my 3rd pass around the same rooms, and still not making any sense of it, I took a break. I was leaning back, tapping the back of my head against the wall as if trying to dislodge a good idea. Instead, I picked up the radio, clicking the receiver and turning the dials. Now it was just a plastic brick, no better than a paperweight. I checked the back, unlatching the battery cover. Still empty. Then, a noise. There's a way out, you know. The crackling voice came from the radio, but there was something about it that resonated within me, like the reverb was tickling the back of my mind. "You're not real," I mumbled. "I'm hallucinating." "Are you sure?" It's like a sensory deprivation tank. If your senses stop getting input, your brain starts firing random signals just to keep them occupied. Otherwise, it sort of atrophies. So I'm just a random brain signal? I would suppose so. Interesting, the voice continued. So that means whatever I say is an expression of yourself. No, it's just random noise. You might as well be a cat's meow or a leaf in the wind. But what do I sound like to you? Try to categorize me. Make sense of me. Who am I? Little sidebar. I don't know how this guy is staying so calm. Like, he's talking to a voice that is either a ghost or he's hallucinating, and he's like, "You're not real, shut up." Okay, let's continue. The voice was a man. Age was difficult to tell through a radio, but I was guessing they weren't a teenager or a senior. adult or middle-aged, with a slight hint of an accent similar to my own. That was a curious choice. Where's that accent from? I asked. Wherever you want it to be from. Cute deflection. I wonder why I'm imagining you like that. Maybe you're trying to express something. Why would I care about some random person with an accent? Maybe I'm not a random person. I leaned the radio away, closed my eyes, and shook my head. Don't do that, I whispered. Don't say things like that. I wandered the dark for a bit, desperately trying to make sense of my surroundings. The number of steps on the stairs were different. The corridor turned right instead of left. The ceiling was lower, and the angle of the tilt in the floor of the big room was deeper. I thought I felt a door handle, but upon doubling back, I realized it was a clasp for a missing pipe. I talked out loud all that time, getting the occasional response from the radio. I knew it wasn't real, but it kept me from digesting random thoughts into something rancid. I had to stay focused on the task ahead and find a way forward. There had to be a way forward. There's no such thing as an impossible space. The operator wasn't trying to get in my head or make wild claims. Most of the time, he was just listening, adding the occasional remark when I made an incorrect statement or misinformed decision. And when I came back to the same room I'd already been in for the umpteenth time, tearing my own hair out with frustration, that voice came through loud and clear. Do you want a suggestion? You're not real. Then what's the harm? It doesn't make sense, I snapped back. I'm talking to a wall. Anything that comes from this, at best, is accidental. You have any better ideas? I flung the radio across the room, shattering it against the wall on the other side. I heard the plastic clatter and roll down the tilted floor, pooling at a small grate in the center of the room. Some of the smaller pieces trickled, though. I pushed my hands against my ears, trying to clear my thoughts. Are you done? The voice wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was resonating through me, like my bones were picking up a radio signal. I didn't know what to say. Before I could open my mouth, it answered for me. Then let's get going. I was out of ideas. My tongue was going dry, and my head was swimming from prolonged stress. I could feel this sense of exhaustion seeping into my bones, turning my movements slow and sloppy. I was dragging my feet and not even touching the walls anymore. If I stumbled or walked into something, that was on me. That was fine. The operator mentioned a few suggestions. Take a left turn instead of going forward. Stick to the right. 3 steps back, sharp left. When I could be bothered to filter out that voice from the screaming in the back of my mind, I did as I was told. And slowly but surely, I began to notice things changing. There were different rooms, and the air grew denser. There was a strange smell in the air. The concrete started to feel different, more porous. Maybe this wasn't better, but at least it was new. I started hearing strange noises. There were machines overhead, pressured air rushing just out of sight, flowing water. Why'd you lead me down here? I asked. You tricked me into this. You were already tricked, the voice responded. I've been trying to get you out, but it shifts things around. You told me I could go in, and that there were people backing me up. I was trying to put you at ease while I figured this out. Figured what out? What are we doing here? It wants you to go a certain way. Haven't you ever wondered why you're always drawn to look in places you weren't supposed to? It wants you to find it. And now you're very close to doing so. And trust me, you don't want that. Why not? I said, shrugging. Why don't I want that? Because I know what happens when you go too far, when you can't turn back. Things like this want to be found in deep, dark places. I smacked the side of my head, as if trying to get better reception in my mind, like that would somehow filter out the nonsense. I came down another fork in the path, left and right. I turned right, as the operator rolled back in my ear. Go the other way, he said. You're getting too close. You gotta turn away. I didn't listen. I kept going forward until I could hear something. There were noises ahead. Chatter. My heart raced as I rushed forward. Please turn around, the operator asked. Turn around right now. I could hear people talking. I turned a corner, and for the first time in days, I could see a door. I could see a door. There was a faint light coming from underneath, and I could hear people walking around in the other room. I ran up to it and pushed down on the handle. Someone on the other side was calling out, asking if anyone was there. "The key," the operator begged. "I left you a key." I pushed down on the handle and stopped, fumbling around with my right hand. I could feel the key still in my pocket. I'd completely forgotten about it. "There is a way out, but this ain't it. I promise you, this ain't it. Please don't do this. Please don't go that way." "Why not?" I whispered. "They're right there." "It's not real. I made the same mistake. Don't go in." My hand stayed on the handle. Someone urged me to open it. Someone asked me to take a peek. They were laughing with relief, saying how pleased they were to finally have found me, but something didn't feel right. I stepped back. "Open the door on your end," I said out loud. "It's not working." There wasn't as much as a tug on the handle. They came with excuses. Someone had their hands full. Someone said it didn't open from their end. Someone pretended not to hear me. The key in my pocket felt heavier as I traced the outline of the etched sunflower with my thumb. This was real. That was a real thing. What was on the other side of that door wasn't. I stepped back, and as I did, the light behind the door vanished. The voices disappeared, leaving the hallway suddenly deathly quiet. "What do I do?" I whispered. "What do I do?" The operator whispered back, "Go the other way, and don't stop for nothing." I turned around and ran as the door creaked behind me. I heard wet skin slapping against the concrete floor, stumbling forward at an awkward pace. I headed straight, then took a sharp right. The air was growing more dense, more warm. I traced my hand along the right wall, only for it to shift. The concrete grew hot and soft, like sand from the beach. Then the grains turned fine, until it was more like a sludge. It was like dragging your hand across raw chicken. "It wants you to stop," the operator said. "It's trying to distract you. Keep going." The hallway would contract and expand like a breathing entity. At times, the floor would roll, as if trying to swallow me. I could feel it tilt in different angles, making the way forward twist and turn. One moment I'm going forward. Next moment, the hallway tilted upward, and I'm using ridges in the floor to climb a makeshift ladder. Then I'm falling on my back, holding on for dear life as I'm thrown this way and that. All the while, something at the bottom is waiting for me to drop. Something that came out of that door, and who's tired of playing games. I was soaking wet when I came to what felt like a dead end. There was this slimy substance covering the wall, but I could push against it. It felt like trying to pop a soap-drenched balloon. Using scissors from the first aid kit, I managed to cut a big enough hole for my hand to fit, and rip all the way through. As I did, everything rolled again, as something screamed in pain. Not with sound, but with movement, convulsion, and heat. I could feel the compressed air press against my eardrums, making my sense of balance shiver. There was a door at the end of the hallway. It was chained. "This is it," the operator said. Get the key and go." It was coming down the hall, heading straight for me. It was so fast. How could it be so fast? I reached for my key and felt around for a lock. There was one. I slotted the key in, turned, and pulled. There was a click, and the chain rattled to the floor. As I swung the door open and dashed through, I turned around for a moment, just to close it behind me. As I did, I saw something staring back at me from the dark. Something with milk-white skin and atrophied eyes, and the wild-grown maw of an invertebrate predator. The door closed, and I stepped back, catching my breath. There was light here. The operator came through, but the voice was barely reaching me. I could hear scratches, like interference, like I was just out of reach. "Just keep going," he said. "Not far. Got it from here." "What about you?" I asked. "Are you still in there?" "Went the wrong way." I paused for a moment, looking back. The light was faint, but my eyes were still adjusting. I couldn't focus. "Is that you?" I asked. "I mean, really you?" There was a short pause as the world came into view. The operator thought about it for a moment and then sighed. "Is what it is," he said. "Later, Gator." I followed the sound of machinery and wandered straight out onto a platform. Early commuters saw me wandering out of a maintenance tunnel, and I was approached by a janitor. I wasn't making any sense at that point. When law enforcement came to pick me up, I was delirious. It took them hours to identify me, and I was of little help. I'd been wandering down there for almost 3 full days. I was dehydrated. They had found the missing urban explorer and shifted their rescue attempt to me, trying to figure out exactly where I'd gone off the beaten path. No one managed to find the black door that I was describing, or the corridor where it was supposed to have been. Retracing my steps seemed impossible, as nothing was the way I described it. They couldn't explain what I'd experienced. My clothes were covered in a thin layer of hydrochloric acid and potassium chloride in a mix similar to gastric acid, like I'd been walking through a massive, diluted stomach. There were interviews, questionnaires, and even a short article in a local newspaper. Most wanted to talk about the fear of being lost in the dark and what it does to your mind. It lost its novelty after about a week, and I was back at work like nothing had happened. I still do search and rescue on a volunteer basis sometimes. I'm a bit more careful, sure, but you can't change what you are overnight. And yet, I think something has changed. I'm asking different questions nowadays, and I'm not sure I want an answer. I can't say for sure what I was doing during those 3 days, or what I experienced, but I know what I heard. I know I wasn't alone, and in those rare moments where I think it was all some fake, made-up nonsense from the back of my mind, I look into the top drawer of my nightstand. That's where I keep a small key, with an etched sunflower, that someone left for me in the dark.
This one started out pretty normal. I mean, unfortunate, but normal. His brother went missing, very sad. Then he starts volunteering for search parties. And then, now the walls are talking to you. And this voice in your walkie-talkie with no batteries is your dead brother. Anyways, the next one's from r/no sleep from Saturday.
There's always blood on the counter. The biggest changes in life usually come about in unexpected ways. Back when this all went down, I wasn't expecting anything to impact my day-to-day life. I was worrying about things like whether or not Marissa was going to respond to my texts or ghost me for the 4th day in a row. I was wondering about whether or not I had to work an extra shift the following week, or if I could take time off to go to a concert. That's the kind of thing I was thinking about, not whatever the hell was going on with my kitchen counters. I should take a moment to explain. Back then, I was living in an apartment. The owner was having it refurbished, but there'd been a shipment delay that caused a couple of things to be delivered at a later date. For example, a new sink for the bathroom. The landlord switched it while I was out. Next up was the kitchen countertops. They used to be this cheap, powdery, pressed cork type of wood, but now they've been exchanged with slabs of stone. I didn't even think about it until I got home from work and saw the note on the door. Installation finished. We appreciate your patience. I barely even noticed. A kitchen counter is something you sort of take for granted. It wasn't until I made myself a sandwich that I realized that, hell, these things were pretty neat. Smooth, polished stone. It felt nice to the touch, a little warm. Each was a distinctly different piece, having varied shapes and patterns ingrained in the stone. The counter was split into 4 straight sections and a corner piece. I dragged my hand across each one. My microwave and knife block were still there, so they must have put everything back in place by hand. That was nice of them. As I got to the section at the far end, my thumb snagged on something. I'm not entirely sure what it was, but it felt like a splinter. I put my thumb in my mouth, but not fast enough. A few drops of blood spilled on the counter. I'd only had them for a couple of minutes, and there was already blood on them. That had to be bad luck. I never figured out what I snagged my thumb on. I didn't think much about it for a couple days. I'd walk by those counters when I made my dinner, or brush my teeth, or whatever other little things you do every day that you don't think that much about. It's just a part of the ambiance. Stone, wood, plastic, it doesn't really matter. It's just another thing, and things don't matter that much when you're late for work or finally getting a response from Marissa about meeting up next Sunday. One day, I was standing there cutting up an orange. I poked myself in the index finger. Another few droplets spilled on the counter. As I wrapped my finger in some paper, I watched those blood drops pool in the middle of the counter. I hadn't noticed it before, but there was a slight tilt to it. Any liquid spilled on the counter naturally pooled in the middle, and if there was too much, it trickled out like a spout. None of the other pieces on the counter did this, only the edge section. I cleaned it up and enjoyed my orange, not thinking too much about it. A lot of things out there are over-engineered to the point where you don't know about half the features. Like those little white paper thimbles you use to put ketchup in at fast food joints. Did you know those can fold out? They can get twice as big. It's the kind of little thing you can go your whole life without noticing. For about a week, everything was as it should be. Work, having a coffee with Marissa, getting to bed early, just the everyday cycle of things. I did notice I was having a streak of bad luck, though. There was always something bothering me, but it was usually a mild annoyance. A paper cut, brushing my teeth a little too hard, biting down on the corner of my nail until a little red dribbled out. Stuff like that. But every time it happened, I couldn't help but notice a couple of things. First, that it almost always happened near that kitchen counter. And second, that whatever little drop of blood was spilled always pooled so naturally in the center of it, like the countertop was built for this. I remember the thought sneaking up on me like a prowling cat. I was having a sandwich in the kitchen after a night out. As I waited for my phone to buzz, I considered just how many times I'd accidentally bled on that counter. The answer, once I thought about it, surprised me. I'd bled on it every day since it got here. It seemed unlikely, but once I mapped it out, that was the truth of it. I always flossed my teeth while walking around the kitchen, and my gums were not in the best of shape. A little blood there. I had this scab on my arm that, when scratched, bled a little. Another few drops there. A paper cut here, a slip of the knife there, a particularly bloody steak. One way or another, for about a week, there'd been blood on that counter every single day. I chalked it up to bad luck, and even then, it was at most a curiosity. As soon as the phone buzzed, the thought fled me like a startled bird darting for the sky. Yeah, bro, I'd be getting rid of that counter. Actually, no, I wouldn't get rid of the counter. I'd just be moving out. I did start to pay a little more attention, though. I was being a bit more careful. I stopped walking around while brushing my teeth, instead resorting to sitting down and counting out the seconds. I started preparing my food on another section of the counter, as if depriving the edge piece would somehow grant me some modicum of control. But even so, a couple of drops would make their way to it, one way or another. Sometimes when I wasn't even paying attention. For example, one day I smacked a particularly large mosquito on it, leaving a little blood stain. Another time I had a nosebleed, and I didn't even notice it until it got on my hands. Despite my, albeit minor, acts of resistance, a couple of drops would find their way to that counter either way. That's where that alien thought hit me for the first time. There's always blood on the counter. I've always been a bit superstitious. I avoid breaking mirrors or walking under ladders. Hell, I don't say thank you when someone says bless you after a sneeze. I've heard that's bad luck too. It's not so much that I actually believe the universe will turn against me if I abstain from certain rituals, but it's more like a set of behaviors that have imprinted on me over the years. I think we all have things like that, which we just need to do. Little misconceptions and superstitions that keep us believing things work in ways they don't. I began to consider the possibility that maybe, somehow, there had to be blood on the counter. I didn't question how or why, but the idea itself added up. There had been a little blood there every single day, that much was true. It had all been from a series of little misfortunes, but that didn't change the fact. But I think what made me uneasy was that little groove, that slight tilt, making every drop of liquid pool in the middle. It was so perfect, symmetric, like the stone itself was made for this purpose. I would just have to wait and see. I was going away for a few days, so there'd be no blood on the counter anyway. I was off for a few days. Marissa and I were seeing each other, and I went to stay at her place. I also had a work trip the following Monday, so I was away from home for a couple days. By the time I got back, I was so exhausted that I didn't even consider the kitchen counter. I mean, who in their right mind would? It wasn't until I heard a strange noise that I snapped to attention. It was coming from the kitchen. I put down my bag and noticed two distinct and recognizable sounds long before I stepped through the kitchen doorway. One sound was the hiss of a sudden wind. The other was the buzzing of flies. There was a dead bird on the floor. It had crashed through the window, slammed into my kitchen, and died. The flies were already feasting on it. I could see them crawling all over, their wings twitching. From a distance, it looked like static, these little black dots spread out in a random pattern, the only constant being their movement. And, as always, there was blood on the counter. The landlord, a tall and skinny guy in his late 40s, had me put up a cardboard patch on the window while we waited for a replacement panel. When he came up to inspect the damage, he dragged his finger across the edge of the broken glass. Naturally, he got a little cut. As he hurried to wash it off, a couple of drops of blood spilled on the counter, which, of course it did. What is it with people and having to touch things that we know will hurt us? Gonna be a few days, he mumbled. How are you enjoying the countertops? Pretty neat, huh? Yeah, neat, I said, nodding along. Much smoother. And tougher, he added, giving them a tap. Gonna need a sledgehammer to make a dent in this thing. You know what they're made of? Some kind of stone. Limestone, I think. He patted the stone and went on his merry way, turning only when he got to the door. I'll have the window fixed by next week. Sorry about the hassle. While the dead bird was gone, the flies remained. They pooled around that countertop, as if still sensing something in its grooves. Then again, maybe they knew there'd be more blood to come. Either way, they were there to stay. I had to get a fly swatter and hang it next to my fridge. I got a blue one, with a sunflower on the handle. As I was heading to work one morning, I knew I'd be gone pretty late. I was seeing Marissa after work, and chances were I'd be spending the night there. That made me pause. If I were to leave, would another bird come crashing through the window? What other absurdity could happen? Then again, nothing could happen. There was no evidence pointing to this being anything else than my superstitious mind making up ghost stories in my head. And yet, the buzzing of flies told another story. They weren't around for make-believe. They wanted blood. I don't know what made me hold my hand out over the countertop. I had a small cut on my thumb, and applying just a little bit of pressure made a blood drop spill out. I didn't feel a thing as it plopped into the groove, centering itself perfectly on the counter. I don't know why I did it, but I felt this ease in my chest, like I'd set something straight. I could walk away with a good conscience. The following weekend, Marissa was having a get-together with some of her friends. I had planned to go, but at the last minute, she had to cancel. There had been a leak in her bathroom. On a whim, I offered to have her relocate to my place for the night. We hadn't been dating for that long, but this would be a good time to meet some of her friends and break some ice. It took some convincing, but she eventually came around to it. Marissa arrived early. We made some appetizers together and prepped some cocktails. She spent at least 2 hours putting together a playlist. I made a little poster and put it up in the hallway, telling my neighbors we were having a get-together. All fairly normal casual party stuff. It was nice though, it felt very coupley. We hadn't done a lot of that stuff before. We were expecting about 10 people, but some of them brought plus ones. Some younger folks barely in their 20s, mixing with some work friends well into their 30s. Some brought wine, others stuck to smiles and snacks. My entryway was too small to fit all the jackets. We had a nice enough time. Marissa butterflied from one group to another, gossiping and chatting away, leaving me to handle the practical details. Getting things from the oven, filling up bowls, putting out glasses, opening wine bottles, that kind of thing. Meanwhile, she was floating around, having people admire her fancy new dress. It wasn't that fancy though, it cost less than $30, but to her credit, she wore it well. I was, admittedly, in a bit of a mood. Marissa had barely introduced me to any of her friends, and I hadn't heard her mention me as the boyfriend to any of them. It was something we'd discuss, her reluctance to actually outright commit to the relationship. Instead, she just introduced me by my first name and rushed off to the next adventure. It frustrated me. It's an ugly feeling. We had some fun, though. There were a couple of party games, plenty of drinks to go around, and the kind of half-shouted, semi-private, late-night philosophizing. Wow. I'm leaving that mistake in because I think it's funny. Philosophizing that can only come from an abundance of wine and a comfy kitchen chair. I didn't learn a single name from those who came that night, but I remember our many talks about ridiculously deep topics. No, wait, I think there was a guy named Kibble. He had a whole thing about probability that he talked about. Sometime around midnight, things were getting hazy. I'd had a couple too many drinks, and about half the guests had left. Those who remained had dedicated themselves to finishing what was left in the bottles left behind. Marissa was half asleep on the couch, clinging to one of her friends and nearly snoozing on their shoulder. Meanwhile, I was in the kitchen washing up a wine glass. One of the guests had a thing about not wanting to refill their glass. It had to be cleaned in between pours. I don't mind. It was nice to get out of that room for a bit. I don't remember her name, but she was one of the younger guests. She came in, grabbed the wine glass, and leaned against the counter. She grasped her wine bottle and absent-mindedly made small talk as she waved it around. She had a lot of big ideas and big words, making the sway of the bottle go further and further. Finally, as she waved away a fly buzzing near her face, she smashed the wine glass. Out of instinct, she tried to grab the pieces. She closed her fingers around the sharp edges and froze. She bled from her hands. The others rushed in to see what was going on. I don't think they noticed the flies had been there all along. As I looked at the others, I realized something unsettling. As blood pooled in the center of the counter, no one looked worried. No one was calling out, screaming, or running up to see what was going on. It's like they already knew. They just stood back and looked as blood poured from her hands. She didn't seem to mind either. No urgency, no call for a Band-Aid, nothing. She could take one step to the left and have her hands run on her cold tap, but instead, she just stood there, letting the blood pool on the counter. As I looked around the room, I was the first to speak up. Should I call an ambulance? There was no response. Instead, she squeezed her hands a little, forcing out another dribble of blood. The others just watched. Are you okay? Again, nothing. Just the buzzing of flies. After about a minute, she moved over and ran her hand under the tap. Marissa got a fresh towel from the bathroom while I moved over to sweep up the glass. Not 5 minutes later, they all said their goodbyes and left, even Marissa. She was supposed to stay the night, but she'd snuck out like the rest of them, leaving me to clean up that mess on my own. And yeah, she was ditzy. A bit irresponsible, but I don't think that was a matter of carelessness. There was something else in the air. The groove on the counter was full, like an overflowing cup. The blood had reached the spout, making it drip on the floor. I stood there for a while, just watching it. The whole thing felt wrong, like I'd been complicit of a crime. It's like the air of the room had been sucked out, leaving everyone fatigued and fearful. Like the life of the party spilled out onto the floor. By the time I got my soapy mop out, close to 2 a.m., the flies were already gathering. No matter what I think happened, the blood on the counter was real. I could wash it away, but that didn't change the fact that it happened. I decided I was going to do something about it. I called my landlord and tried to have him exchange it, pointing out the groove as a construction error. It wasn't bad enough to make a glass tip or spill, but it was a clear imperfection. He agreed that it was bad, but replacing the whole thing would be expensive. Instead, he settled on a compromise. He'd come by with a bunch of tools and smooth it out himself. He was a handy guy, he could do it. I was a bit skeptic, but it was better than nothing. He came by that same weekend, toolbox in hand. I was a bit distracted. Marissa and I were having a fight, but it'd take her 15 minutes to respond to my messages, and the responses I got were usually just 1 to 3 words. Meanwhile, I was tapping away, trying to come up with the correct combination of words just to get her to care. I was losing. "It's this one, right? the landlord called out from the kitchen. "I'll start with the angle grinder." He pointed at the right section, and I nodded. He waved away a couple of flies and gave me a heads up. There was going to be some noise. I moved into the bedroom and closed the door. I was so focused on the little screen that I barely paid any attention to what was happening in the other room. She'd left me on read for 3 messages, and we were going on 20 minutes. It was driving me crazy. When I finally put my phone down, I realized the machine noise was sounding a bit strange, muted. Not just from the closed door, but from something else too. Even from outside the kitchen, I could see a small streak of blood. It had shot out far enough to almost reach the hallway. I'm not going to speculate on what happened, or why, but the landlord was standing by the countertop with the tip of his index finger sawn off. The angle grinder was still spinning, kissing the tip of his finger bone with an industrial-grade diamond blade. I could see smoke coming off of it as the machine shrieked. The landlord, on the other hand, didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching the blood overflow. I pulled the plug on the grinder, and he slowly snapped out of it, but he never really caught on to the kind of urgency a situation like this demands. There was no rush of adrenaline or desperate calls for help. He just nodded, excused the mess, took his tools, and left. He'd fixed absolutely nothing. As I waved away a couple of flies, I'd realized he left the tip of his finger on the counter. I could barely see it from the mass of black dots swarming it, rubbing their wings together. I think that's the moment it finally sunk in. I wasn't dealing with something normal or rational. For all intents and purposes, there was some kind of will and way acting on its own, pushing one fact beyond a strange fiction. There would always be blood on the counter. I spent some time looking up what I could do. There wasn't really that much to say. The countertop was made of limestone, cut and prepped in Mexico. It was imported and assembled stateside. That was pretty much it. The company was still very active, and there were no signs of there being anything unusual about them. They had plenty of limestone countertops, and everyone seemed happy about them. No crazies in the comments ranting about blood. I did drop into a couple of rabbit holes. For example, a lot of old Mayan temples were made out of limestone too. They constructed everything from temples to altars in that same material. It's not that strange, really. You can make a bunch of stuff with limestone. I remember listening to a short documentary about the Mayans as I mopped the kitchen floor for the second time in less than a week. My mop was getting this sickly pinkish hue from having been dipped in a deep red over and over. I tried washing it a couple times, but I could still see the red in it long after it was gone. I ended up sitting in the kitchen, completely forgetting to check Marissa's reply. Instead, I looked at my countertop, trying to figure out what the deal was. This crazy thought came to mind. Maybe it wanted to be something else. Much like how I'd wanted to be a cowboy growing up. Maybe this was a way of lashing out or realizing some kind of untapped potential. It was impossible to know for sure. The flies followed the tip of the finger all the way into the garbage. Over the next few days, things with Marissa got progressively worse. We got into another fight, and when she outright said she wasn't sure that we were actually dating, I called the whole thing off. I wasn't going to stand for that. I spent some time with my friends, took a couple extra shifts, and tried to keep busy. Or maybe I just didn't want to go home. Just passing through my kitchen would give me this sinking feeling. Like I was in the presence of something. Like I was missing some key detail or forgetting to do something important. At times, I considered giving the counter a drop of blood just to feel myself calm down. A tap on the finger isn't so bad. It's much worse to anticipate an accident that you know will come. If you haven't bled on the countertop, you're not going to start chopping carrots or cutting chicken breasts. You know what's going to happen. But things reached a tipping point when I took a double shift and crashed at work. I was gone for a full day, and when I got back home, there was a dead mouse on the counter. I have no idea where it came from or how it got there. I live on the second floor, so it must have made its way up somehow. I'd never heard or seen any signs of rodents before. I'd had enough. I got a hammer and a big iron spike. I'd seen one outside. It must have been used to secure the fence leading up to the entrance. Now, I was going to use it like a chisel. I hurried into the kitchen, my boots still wet with mud, and placed the spike on the countertop, readying a blow from my hammer. Then I dropped the spike. It wasn't a conscious movement, my hand just twitched a little. There was this impulse to lay the palm of my hand flat on the counter, spreading my fingers in every direction. I was still readying the hammer. With the same feeling as I had at the party, I wondered why I wasn't putting the hammer down. Why was I letting this happen? What was I exactly about to do? I blinked and dropped the hammer, letting it crack one of the kitchen tiles. I'd been fully prepared to smash my own hand on the countertop for no apparent reason. It just seemed like the appropriate thing to do. There'd been a will imposed on me. I picked the spike up and the hammer and tried again, faster this time. Spike up, hammer up, a scream. At the last moment, I turn around and flick the hammer straight across the room. It crashes into the opposite wall, making a dent in the gypsum. My hand felt warm, and as I turned to look, I realized I was holding the spike at a strange angle. The tip of it was burrowed in the palm of my hand, and there was blood on the counter. My thumb was sore, so I couldn't stay up all night scrolling. Marissa was already out meeting new people, posting on her socials. She didn't even slow down. Not even a frown on her reel. Not that I could scroll long enough to check. My hand was killing me. I stayed up late that night, wondering what to make of this. I was going to have to clean the counter again, but really, what was the point? No matter how many times I cleaned it, it ended up the same way. There would always be blood on the counter, no matter what I did, and no matter how much I tried to fight it. I could be standing there every day, spraying it with the same lemon-scented bullshit, and I'd have to do it again the next day. Like showering or brushing your teeth. Was this my life now? I wasn't imagining this. It was getting worse. It was demanding more, and bigger. No one had to spell it out for me, but I could feel it. It wanted to take a life. Okay guys, hear me out. If the rent is low enough, just keep it happy. Like, give it a little drop of blood every day, like poke your finger, one little drop, and just keep it at bay. Because, if you're paying good rent in a good area, you don't want to pass that up. I got back in the kitchen the next day. I put on 3 pairs of gloves, got that iron spike and the hammer, and took another swing at the countertop. This time, I got a hit in, cracking part of the seal underneath. It took a couple of tries, and I smashed my own thumb once, but it was progress. I took a break to check my thumb, then got back at it. It took me 9 hours to break enough of the seal around the countertop to dislodge the whole stone. By that time, my hands were a wreck, and there were bloody handprints all over the damn thing, but I got it done. I pulled it off and dropped it to the floor, cracking another floor tile. It wasn't that heavy, but my hands felt like they were burning. I decided to call the landlord again. I would happily pay for the damages as long as he got rid of the damn thing. He came by with his finger wrapped in a bandage. He was, admittedly, pretty tired of this whole ordeal. Noticing the mess I'd made, he just sighed. "I'll pay for it," I said, "all of it." He nodded at me. Without another word, he grabbed the stone slab. But instead of heading for the door, he stopped for a moment. There was something about the look in his eyes that made me uneasy. His mind was a mile away. He was looking at nothing. I snapped my fingers at him, but he didn't as much as blink. Instead, he raised the stone slab like he was Moses holding a commandment. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Hello?" He looked at me, then shook his head. He looked down at the stone, letting out a frustrated grunt. And in a fit of frustration, he took a step back and flung the entire slab out the window. Glass everywhere. The damn thing sailed through the air, landing with a meaty thud. The landlord shrugged at me, gasping for air. That'd been more exerting than it looked. "Let's go get it in the truck," he said. "I'll get rid of it." We went down the stairs together, but something didn't feel right. Not just because of the action of throwing something out a window, but it seemed too easy. I'd fought to get that thing off, but he'd thrown it out without a second thought. It didn't add up. Coming outside, I could see I was right. Turns out a neighbor had passed my window just as the landlord chucked the slab. That meaty thud was not a chunk of stone hitting the lawn, and not a matter of messing up the community garden. It was an adult man having his head caved in against the pavement. It felt so unreal, seeing a full body in a colorful sports jacket with half their head cracked on the ground. There was still movement, a fading pulse. People were coming out from all over. It felt like descending into a nightmare, and I didn't know whether to run or cry or scream. I ended up doing neither. I just stood there, like the guests of my party. Looking around, so was everyone else. They stared in silent reverie. The whole neighborhood was out to see the dead man on the street. It was less of a murder and more like a community gathering. No one was happy or cheering or even expressive. They just stood there, like this was the most normal thing to happen all day. Like this was supposed to happen. Like it was expected. "Is anyone going to call for help?" I gasped. "Anyone?" A dog was going ballistic nearby, barking up a storm, and I couldn't stop staring at the limestone countertop. It was still intact, lying to the side, absolutely drenched in blood. No one was moving a muscle. Eventually, there was an ambulance, and police, and witness statements. People asked me in very careful voices about what happened, offering me the occasional snack from a vending machine, probably to compensate me for sticking me in an interrogation room for hours on end. Good cop, bad cop. I didn't know what to say. I told them what truth I could, that there had been a problem with the countertop and that I'd asked my landlord to help me remove it. The rest was a matter of impulse, random happenstance, and something I couldn't quite explain. All the while, my head was swimming. Had this happened because of some shared paranoia, or had it been the will of some unseen third party? Were we ultimately responsible? By the time they finished, I'd been watching their notes. There were scribbles about the assembly, the manufacturer, timing of the attack, all of it. The doodle of an eye. I couldn't bring myself to explain my theory. It didn't make sense for me to mention it. I couldn't think of a way to say it without sounding like a lunatic. Things don't wish for things. They don't want to be other things, because they can't want. And yet, there seems to be this inclination, this divine leaning towards one thing acting like something else. It was the only way I could think of it. It was a kitchen counter, wishing to be a sacrificial altar, and we were obliged to help, unknowingly or not. Before I went home that day, I decided to ask the officers a final question. What's going to happen to it? It'll be filed in evidence, they explained. It's technically a sort of murder weapon. I almost laughed. They were going to file it under evidence and put it among the knives and guns and iron pipes. They'd leave it on some shelf somewhere in storage and forget about it. It'd sit there as the other things would pile on top. Evil things, horrible things stained with hateful impulses. It would be a resting place where desperation and bad intention would rest upon it for decades to come. And as the stone was locked away, sealed and unclean, they had assured that there would always be blood on the counter. Oh, your landlord? He updated you with new counters. Oh my gosh, that's so nice. Yeah, your countertop is an ancient artifact that is thirsty for blood. Need I say more? I don't know how these authors come up with this stuff. Like, this story started out, like, so normal. Just like a regular old story or movie, and they ended with that. Anyways, here's the next one. It's from r/nosleep from user Tommy Steele. I found a video rental store in a small town. What was on the tape shattered my family. I've always wanted to make this trip. My whole life, Seattle has been my home, and I'd never ventured far before. A coast-to-coast road trip with my husband and children had been a fantasy of mine since I first started dating the man decades ago. It slowly became clear over the years that despite his promises, the trip would never be happening. At 50, I'm finally on the road, but I never wanted it to be like this. Not under these circumstances. I'm alone. It's only happening now because my son is dead. After the divorce, my children were, in my mind, old enough to choose where they wanted to live. John, my oldest, chose to stay with me, My daughter Bree went with my ex-husband. I tried my best to maintain a relationship with her, but she never seemed interested. God only knows what my ex was telling her about me. Growing up, John was my world. I seldom dated after leaving his father. I just never had the time, as I worked 2 or 3 jobs while raising him. It was worth it, though. John knew about my dream trip. He brought it up several times along his journey to becoming a man. "You'll get your trip one day, Ma," he said, "even if I have to take you myself." His funeral was the worst day of my life. My ex-husband and daughter were there, and a piece of me hoped I would have at least some support from them, but it wasn't to be. The glare my ex gave me said everything, even though he didn't speak the words. "It's all your fault." I couldn't even bring myself to speak at the podium after that. My daughter gave a eulogy instead. Through sobs, she lamented her rocky relationship with John and how much she regretted her role in them not being close. She even went as far to tell everyone that he had been her inspiration to become a paramedic. John had never married, so I suppose it shouldn't have come as a surprise that he had appointed me the executor of his estate. It was then I learned that he had listed me as the beneficiary of $1 million life insurance policy. I didn't give a shit about the money, or really much of anything. I spent a lot of time watching videos of my son on my phone. Every time I pressed play, I wished the house fire hadn't destroyed the old tapes from when our family was together. I would have given anything to see those again. It was at this low point I knew it was time for that road trip. It started off normally enough. I made the usual tourist stops, as well as many off-the-beaten-path, discovered through years of research. It wasn't until the Midwest that the problems started. I won't name the state, just in case. I had been driving long enough to not remember what time I had started that day. The sun had long since set when my low fuel warning pinged from the dashboard. The timing was perfect, as I could barely keep my eyes open. I pulled off at the first exit I saw that listed a gas station and slowly followed an empty road for miles towards a promised town. Johnstown. Seeing the name made my spine shiver, but a glance at the gas gauge decided the matter for me. After several uncomfortable miles, the lights of the gas station appeared along the main road into town. As I pulled up to the pump, I noticed the absence of a credit card reader. While I didn't want to enter the small building before me as a woman alone at night, the .32 Tomcat pistol in my purse gave me enough nerve to go inside and buy fuel. Though outdated, the inside was surprisingly well maintained. I went straight up to the counter where a young man in a camo hat stood, looking thoroughly uninterested. "Hi," I said, forcing a smile. "Can I get some gas on the pump out there?" The man stared at me without a word. Though I held my smile, I felt the hairs on my neck standing up. I could have sworn the lights inside dimmed slightly when he had began pushing buttons on the register. "How much?" he asked in a monotone voice. "50, I said, sliding cash onto the counter. "Keep what's left, if there is any." Without breaking his gaze to so much as glance at the bill, the man slowly reached for it. For a moment, the image of him snatching my arm and pulling me over the counter flashed across my mind, but he simply opened the drawer and placed the bill inside. "Anything else?" "No, sir, that's it, thank you," I said before speed walking back to my car. Though I kept my head down, I could feel his eyes on me as I pumped. I considered making a break for the highway, but my eyelids began to flutter once back inside my car. I could see the town ahead and decided it wouldn't hurt to at least see if the motel seemed safe. As I made my way down the main street, every building was dark except for the motel. It was an unassuming rectangular building with 2 floors. Most of the windows were dark, but the few rooms with lights on were somewhat reassuring. I sat in my car for a moment, the engine still running. Nothing seemed unusual as I scanned the parking lot. It seemed safe enough to walk inside. I grabbed my backpack, stepped out of my car, and paused for a moment. I couldn't help but think of how much safer I would feel if John had been with me. When I walked towards the entrance, I looked back towards the street. To my surprise, the closest building was lit. I guess I had been too tired to notice it before. The neon sign out front read True Video. A video rental store still open in 2026? Wow, guess the town's a little behind, I thought. The motel manager greeted me as I stepped inside the front entrance. To my immense relief, she seemed to be a perfectly normal lady, roughly my own age. Now much more at ease, I opted to rent a room, and she gave me a physical iron key. Room 211 was exactly what you might expect. Old, small, with decor not updated since 1970. What paint that was visible in spots above the dreadful floral wallpaper was a weathered yellow. A queen bed sat against the back wall, facing a dresser with a TV on it. I set my backpack on the bed before turning back towards the TV. It had been years since I had seen an old tube television, and right next to it, an honest-to-God VCR. Man, I haven't used a VCR in forever. My mind went straight to 1999, when John was little. Once a week, I would take him to Blockbuster, and we would choose a film for a family movie night. I thought back to True Video across the street. The nostalgia was too enticing. I made my way out into the cool night air. If you guys remember going to Blockbuster as like a kid, or even a young adult, depending on your age, that was the best feeling ever. Like, I know for me as a kid my mom letting me rent a video game, or, I remember renting the Spy Kids movies from Blockbuster as a kid. Anyways, the hum of the neon signs soon broke the silence of the empty streets as I approached True Video. A bell on the door dinged as I stepped inside, but nobody approached the empty counter. I paid little attention, instead focusing on finding the family movie section. After a brief search, I held in my hands a copy of my son's favorite childhood film, All Dogs Go to Heaven. I stared at the tape as I stood at the counter, lost in my memories. "Anything else for you tonight, ma'am?" came a familiar voice. My eyes snapped upward to see the same young man from the gas station smiling at me from behind the counter. I felt a chill race throughout my body. I couldn't respond. While the young man's clothes and demeanor were entirely different, it was definitely him. This time, however, I noticed a small, circular scar on the side of his neck, as well as a name tag, Michael. My silence seemingly didn't affect the man, as he held his warm smile for several silent seconds. I regained control of my body and shook my head vigorously. "All right then," he beamed. "Your total is $537. Quickly and with a shaking hand, I pulled a 5 and a 1 from my purse and dropped it on the counter, ignoring his outstretched hand. The man simply scooped the bills off the counter as if I hadn't been so rude and handed me my change. "Thank you for your business, ma'am," Michael said cheerfully. "Have a wonderful evening." I hurriedly left without a word, tape in hand. I didn't stop until I was safely locked back inside of my room, now wide awake. It probably took half an hour to calm down, but eventually I reasoned to myself that the men must be brothers, or maybe even cousins. It made sense with the limited employment options in a town this small. That had to be it. While still on edge, I was finally relaxed enough to push the tape into the VCR and settle myself in the bed. Of course, I was crying within the first 5 minutes of the film. It was like being brought back in time without my son there waiting for me. I cried harder as I thought of his heart attack. He wasn't even 30 yet. The coroner said it had been quick, but John had still died alone in the dark. An hour into the film, I had run out of tears. In a way, the brutal experience had made me feel closer to my baby boy. It had been worth it. I closed my eyes, ready to drift off as the movie played in the background, when I heard it. Static. I guess that's why we got away from tapes, I thought. But before I could even open my eyes, I heard my ex-husband's voice from the TV speakers. "He's beautiful. Good job, Grace." I'd know that moment anywhere. Sure enough, when my eyes snapped to the TV, there was the home video my husband had taken when John was born. The image of me holding our son in my hospital bed came into focus.
Every fuzzy pixel matched the old tapes I'd lost in the fire. As I watched myself beam on the screen, the video again cut to static. After a moment came a video shot on the day we first brought John home. My ex gave a tour of the house on camera, proudly showing off the nursery we had built and decorated together. The screen cut again. My cheeks were soaked in tears. I was entirely transfixed. It hadn't even entered my mind how impossible this was. John's first Christmas. My dearly departed parents beamed as John happily beat the hellfire out of the toy they had gifted him. I saw the pride and joy on my own face. The video ended just as I remembered it, with John shitting himself loudly in his high chair. Wow. My parents' laughter was broken by another wall of static. John's first birthday played next. Then his first words. Well, we recorded those later in the day when he did it a second time. A video I had taken of him racing through the house in his father's cowboy boots came next. Then the day his sister Brianna was born. 3-year-old John grinned ear to ear as he held his little sister. The scene played out just as I remembered, but there was one difference, and that difference became a recurring theme. Whenever my daughter's face looked directly at the camera, the entire screen wavered and slid out of focus for a moment before returning to normal. Every video I had ever taken of the kids played in order. Every single one. Their dance party at ages 6 and 3, their first bike rides, the silly moments, each of their milestones, the blog I filmed for 7-year-old John, wherein he rambled about how the Easter Bunny must be a trained killer. I remembered how hard it was to keep a straight face during that. I moved to the edge of the bed, leaning forward as the next film started. I knew this was the final tape, but I didn't want it to end. In the video, my children were playing pirates. My son was sword fighting my daughter, and despite being a full head taller, he had been letting her get strikes in against him. John had clearly intended to lose, throwing an exaggerated lunge and leaving himself wide open. Holding that pose to give Bree a chance to strike. She saw the opportunity and stabbed him in the chest with her foam sword. John died in the most over-the-top way he could, falling dramatically to the ground and announcing his defeat. Bree straddled him and paused. I thought she was making sure he was dead, or maybe even legitimately concerned. Then she brought her sword down on his face in a rage, over and over shrieking, "Die, die, die!" The video ends abruptly then, as I shut the camera off to separate my kids and explain to Bree that there was no need to be so violent. The screen went black. I stared into it, barely holding myself together. This impossible, one-way conversation with the past had drained my soul. I tensed to stand up, but then the screen began a new video, one I had taken on my phone. John's 16th birthday. He sat with a scowl as I sang happy birthday to him with his friends. I grimaced. The moment was cute for me, but John had gotten a lot of flack for that video on social media. I was brought back to the moment I came to regret posting it. The screen flickered again. This time, the video wasn't one I recognized. In it, my teenage kids were arguing. He held a sandwich bag of something I couldn't quite discern, and a look of utter disappointment. "Answer me," he said. "What is this? Where did you get it?" "Screw you," my daughter shouted. "You're not our dad. Give that back." "Sis, this stuff can get you arrested." "I don't care. It's my life, not yours. I don't answer to you." "I'll tell Mom if you don't tell me where you got it right now." "Go ahead," Bree shouted. "I don't care what Mom thinks. Dad won't believe either one of you anyway." At this, John winced. The camera zoomed in on his face, and he looked helpless. "I just don't want you to lose everything," he said quietly. "I'm not gonna, you idiot," she screamed. "You think I've never done this stuff before? I'm gonna party if I want, and you can just deal with it." Before I could acknowledge the frozen brick that had fallen into my gut, the video changed again. It was the home I shared with John after the divorce. The shot came from somewhere across the street. The house was dark and nothing seemed amiss. Then an orange glow appeared in one corner of the house. The fire. And worse, a figure passed by the flames, fleeing the scene. My heart nearly fell out of my body. The fire department had suspected arson, but no concrete evidence had emerged in the investigation. At the time, my ex-husband and I had been in legal battles to increase my visitation with my daughter. Once John had told me about the drugs, I tried to get more involved in her life. My ex fought me every step of the way. The police immediately questioned him, but told me his alibi had been rock solid. I was numb, but I didn't have time to dwell on the revelation, as the next video began. John's high school graduation walk. A happy memory out of place for this time, but one I had filmed myself. His father had chosen not to attend, but his sister had. Then the final video appeared before me. John sported the same new haircut as he had the year he died. My two kids were sipping vodka at John's kitchen table. Things had been strained between them for at least a decade, but my daughter had grown up quite a lot after she moved away from my ex and his influence. It was nice to see them getting along. The two were playing a card game, with the loser having to take a sip from their glass every round. My daughter pounded down the last drops and excused herself to refill her glass. The camera followed her to the counter. With her back to John, she filled her glass from a water bottle. The frame stopped with a smirk on her face as she did so. I assume she was proud of cheating in their contest. The screen glitched again, and there was John, my son, sprawled on the floor, drooling over himself and giggling profusely. "Hey sis," he slurred from the floor. "I'm so glad you came over. I miss drinking with you." My daughter's face wavered on the screen again. "No, thank you, bro," she said, slowly reaching into her bag before kneeling down beside her big brother. "You've done your part perfectly." "Part?" he said. "Ooh, am I an actor now?" The camera suddenly shifted to my daughter's point of view. "Sure," she said, glancing down at the syringe in her hand. "A real A-lister." John grinned, his head flopping onto his shoulder. "I'd like to thank the Academy for," he started, but the alcohol had taken its toll. My heart thundered as I watched Bree take the cap off the syringe. "I've got you, bro," she said soothingly. "Just sleep." I watched helplessly as whatever she gave him took effect. I saw my son cough, convulse, froth at the mouth, and die, reaching out to his sister for help the entire time. "That bitch will get the money," Bree whispered after John stopped moving. "I'm sure of it, but I'll figure something out." The screen abruptly went black. The VCR ejected the tape. Tears flowed freely as I came to terms with the horrors I had just seen. I sobbed in the darkness of my hotel room for several minutes. I snatched the tape from the VCR and sprinted out of the room. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, my eyes shot across the street to True Video. The storefront was entirely dark. I didn't care if they were closed. I would be getting my answers. I stormed up to the building, but stopped dead when I drew close. The windows were shattered and boarded up from the inside. The neon sign was broken and clung to charred brick by a single rusty bolt, ready to give way at any moment. When I tried the front door, it was unlocked. When I stepped inside the store, I found it completely destroyed. Half the inventory was long gone. What remained was caked in dust and ash. My eyes fell to the counter I had stood at hours earlier. On it, a small television flickered to life. Michael came into focus on the screen. "Get her messages," he said. "She never deleted them. She had help getting the drugs. Her boyfriend also knows she set the fire and will break under pressure. Good luck." When he finished, the TV went dark. I don't know how long I stared at it. It might have been minutes, maybe even hours. When I finally regained my senses, I went straight to the only local I could speak to. Bursting through the motel entrance, I stomped up to the counter and threw the tape down on it. "What the hell is going on in this town?" I shouted at the manager. "Where did that freak at True Video get this?" The manager turned ghost white, but said nothing. "Answer me." She took a deep breath. "What did you see on the tape?" she asked in a voice barely above a whisper. "I saw my daughter," I said as my voice cracked. "I saw her murder her brother." "Did Michael give that to you?" "Yes," I said, raising my broken voice again. "And what the hell was he doing at the gas station earlier? I want to know what sick game that bastard is playing. I want to know right now." "Please don't talk about my sons like that," the manager interrupted quietly. She sighed. "Daniel and Michael are my twin boys," she said. "Daniel works at the gas station, and Michael worked at True Video. He was killed in a robbery 2 years ago. He was shot in the throat before they burned the store down." She paused for a moment. I recognized her pain, one grieving mother to another. "They caught the killers, thanks to the security cameras, but last year, another traveler said he rented a video from that store. He said it showed the murder of his sister." She looked at me. "The tape will be blank now," she said, "but Michael was never one to lie. Please leave. Get justice for your son." And with that, she turned her back on me. No amount of screaming made her turn around again. So I went home, drove all through the night and all day until I made it home. I found the information I needed. I got the man to talk. The guilt-ridden coward fessed up quick. My daughter was arrested and charged with John's murder. Last month, the jury convicted her and sentenced her to life in prison without parole. That same day, a VHS tape appeared on my doorstep. With shaking hands, I pressed play. My son appeared on the screen. He said nothing, but he didn't have to. He smiled gently and waved once before the video went black. My VCR whirred and opened to eject the tape, though nothing came out. But I got the message.
This one did start out fairly normal because it's just a sad mother grieving over the loss of her son, going on a road trip. Yeah, you're going in a ghost store, a ghost video store. And yeah, should mention, your daughter actually killed him. Your son, that is. And there's a ghost of him on the ghost VHS from the ghost video rental store. Lots of ghosts.